Everywhere you could hear the latest breaking news that a 40-year-old man had been arrested for kidnapping and holding a child. Everyone was talking about how the victim was kept in his dilapidated barn for 12 years. The news also said that the police detained a suspect on charges of kidnapping, confiscation, and violation of labor laws. The news said that the kidnapping of a minor that happened is the most brutal crime in recent times. Others reported in the news that a minor had been kidnapped and taken over a long distance. When the kidnapper was being let out, many reporters tried to ask him questions about the perpetrator of the crime, who had previously known the victim and others. The news also reported that the victim exhibited hearing and speech impairments, and that authorities believed that the defendant knew about this before planning the crime. When that very barn was opened, a large number of books were found in that barn along with the guy. The rescuers noticed that the guy, despite the fact that the door was open, continued to sit and had a book in his hands that he was reading. One of the rescuers, seeing the guy, called the captain back and reported that they had found him. When they got closer, it was clear from the severe injuries on his body that he had been mistreated over a long period of time. That's why this guy was taken to the hospital, and at this point he was already in a stable condition. A large number of reporters also arrived at the hospital where the guy was sent, dreaming of getting an answer to at least one question from him. Hospital security warned reporters that they were not allowed inside, but they said they were only there because they were feeling unwell too. Two doctors were watching the boy. They already knew that his name was Shin Woo-jin and he was 18 years old. The doctor who stood next to the patient's bed said that the boy was suffering from malnutrition and many external infections. All this time, the guy sat on his bed and looked in the other direction out the window. It was very difficult for him to accept reality. The doctor sitting next to the boy thought how someone could do this to such a beautiful child. After all, he was locked up and forced to work for 12 years. The second doctor continued to read everything they could find during the examination, and one of these diagnoses was that he had lost his voice. When the girl doctor heard about this, she took a notebook with a pen and started writing something on a piece of paper. The doctor asked him what his name was and if he would try to pronounce it. The guy turned around and looked at the piece of paper and what was written there, but continued to sit silently. The girl doctor continued to hold the dream sheet with the inscription in her hands, asking him to try to say something. Unexpectedly for the two doctors, the guy said his name. He said that he was a bastard. When the two doctors heard about this, they were even more surprised because they did not expect such an answer. The guy answered this way because a picture of the events that he had appeared before his eyes. He remembered how he was forced to work very hard despite the fact that the sun was shining brightly. At that moment, when it was hot outside, they forced him to work so hard that his hands were rubbed until they bled. The man who stole it was sitting in the shadows at the time and then watching him do his job. Only after the boy had worked his day could he be given some rice to eat. They gave him rice, but no one even gave him a spoon or chopsticks, so he could eat like normal people. The guy ate rice with his hands. He had no other choice. And the person who stole him kept telling him that he was a bastard and that he ate disgustingly. After which, this man locked him in the barn. Only a little light came through a small window on which there was a grate. The guy lived in this barn for all 12 years. The only thing was that there were a lot of books around him. He was very upset about how he lived and how he was treated, but he couldn't do anything about it. The only friends he had in such a life were the cockroaches that lived between the pages of the books that surrounded him. When he saw such cockroaches, he tried to play with them, and for this he caught them. That's how he lived all these 12 years. And all this time he was called a bastard, so he didn't know another name. Two doctors, hearing that he called himself that, were very surprised. They didn't understand how he could call himself a bastard. And what kind of brainwashing did this guy go through if he behaves like this and calls himself that? And also his body was covered with countless scars. No one understood what kind of violence he had suffered all this time. Seeing this guy and realizing how he was being abused, everyone thought that the monster who was holding him should be sentenced to death. Many believed that the kidnapper had no right to continue living among normal people. And even until the end of the investigation, everyone believed that this man would definitely die. The doctor picked up a tablet where all the patient's tests were written down. She said that with all this, there was one relief. After all the medical results are not as bad as they feared, and she told the patient himself about this. After which she put her hand on his shoulder, saying that now he was safe, and he could sleep as much as he wanted because this place was safe. After which the doctor told the guy that she would be back soon. The second doctor asked her if he should look after the patients, to which the girl doctor replied that no, she wants to do it herself, but she needs some time and she will return. After which she very quickly left the room where the patient was, slamming the door. When she went out into the corridor, she saw many reporters trying to break into the room. They wanted to ask her, but they were stopped by guards. One of the reporters asked the doctor about the patient's condition, and they were all interested in the question of whether his family had been found and what was the patient's name. The reporters were also interested in whether this guy could communicate at the moment. All these questions made the doctor furious. She shouted what they were doing next to the patient's room, and was someone's tragedy really entertaining them? She believed that all reporters should be at least a little restrained. She didn't understand how all these people could end up in the hospital. So she asked the security guards they were checking their passes. The doctor said if they didn't leave immediately, she would report them for obstruction and trespassing on a guarded area. At the same time, the guy who was in the ward began to look around, and he saw a sign near one patient where it was written, "Open hip fracture." In the ward with the guy, there was another person who had a leg injury. When the guy looked at him, he determined that his height was about 167 centimeters and his weight was about 60 kilograms. The guy also saw that this man was lefty with rough and dry hands, which is proof that his skin was constantly over-dried. This man read the text messages that he received and was indignant that if they were so worried, they should have visited him. The guy also noticed that the man didn't have any watches or rings on his hand. He wasn't interested in accessories, which meant he was doing physical labor and wasn't married. This man was lying on his hospital bed and constantly checking something on his phone. The guy thought that he was putting the pieces together into a single picture. This man was plastering the building. And at some point he stumbled and fell, and he was very scared. And when he fell, his left-handed brain, instinctively, he directed his left leg down to land on it. All of this he did not do consciously. That is why his femur could not withstand the force of the blow and split, jumping out and revealing that he was injured. It seemed that the guy clearly saw everything that was happening to this man, and as if he was present at it. Even at the last moment, the guy thought that the best first aid in such a situation would be. His thoughts were interrupted. He turned his head and looked to the side. He understood that they had come to him. It was his doctor who came back to see how he was doing. The doctor looked at the guy and asked him if he had a rest. She had a tray with many dishes in her hands. The doctor brought the tray to the patient and looked at him. She was very worried about him. The doctor was the first to ask the guy that he had probably been hungry lately and needed good nutrition, after which the doctor asked him if he would eat with a fork or a spoon, and then handed him a spoon and said that it would be easier for him that way. The guy raised his eyes and looked at her. It seemed that he was trying to get a better look at her. He noticed that the corners of her eyes were slightly drooping, and there were several wrinkles near her eyes. When she closed her eyes, those wrinkles in the corners of her eyes became more noticeable. He also noticed that the muscles in her cheeks had lifted slightly, which was noticeable when she smiled or spoke. All this together formed a single puzzle. The wrinkles in the corners of her eyes, her cheeks rose, and both corners of her lips were symmetrically raised. That's why he concluded that this symmetrical smile is a sincere smile, a sign that she does not see him as a victim. The doctor gave the boy a spoon in his hands and told him to eat as much as he wanted, and no one would scold him anymore. The guy froze for a moment because he didn't know how to react to this situation because there was so much food in front of him. He even swallowed the saliva that he had secreted. He hadn't seen so much food in 12 years. The doctor smiled and said that it was hospital food, so it might not taste very good, but he could eat as much as he could. The guy went crazy. He took a spoon and very quickly, one after another, began to put food into his mouth, after which he took another plate and put it into the hall with his hand. The doctor was very surprised. He ate everything that was on the 3 plates. It seemed that he was not chewing, but simply swallowing. The patient lying in this ward began to observe him. The doctor asked the guy to eat a little more slowly because he could choke. She was so surprised that tears started flowing from her eyes. She realized that this guy had never seen so much food. After just a few minutes, the plates on the tray where the food was were all empty. He had eaten it all. He even took out the last grains of rice from the plates that he couldn't catch with his spoon that he was eating. And he took the last grain of rice and put it in his mouth so as not to leave anything on the plate. Everything that happened before the doctor's eyes surprised her very much. She couldn't hold back her tears. The first thing she wanted to ask him was how he survived all this time, all 12 years that he spent locked up. At that moment, the doctor's phone rang. It was in her robe pocket. The doctor took the phone out of her pocket and answered the call. She didn't understand because the number was unknown. She was informed on the phone that the Woojin family had arrived, and upon hearing this, the doctor said that she would be right there. After which she turned around, addressed the guy, and said that his mom and dad had arrived. The guy was a little surprised. At that moment, he looked at the expression on her face and at her mouth. He couldn't miss a single word she said to him. It was amazing. After all, in his conscious life, he never remembered his mother and father, and least of all, he remembered his family. The doctor repeated once again that his family had arrived, and that she would bring them very soon so that he could see them. After which the doctor took the tray where the food was and very quickly left the room. Woojin continued to sit and watch as the doctor very quickly walked out of the room where he was. He raised his head up and saw that there was a clock hanging on the wall, and he noted the time that was on it. The first thing he thought was that the time it took his mom and dad to get to him wasn't that long. He clearly understood that every second here was important, and he spent 30 seconds in this room, and then 1 minute. He calculated that the time it took his parents to get to him was 1 minute and 21 seconds. At that moment, he heard an inner voice that told him that he would make sure that he could hear his parents. And the very next moment, he began to hear many sounds that had previously been completely inaccessible to him. He sat looking towards the door and heard every second that he could hear thanks to the clock on the wall. It seemed to him that this time was an eternity, and he watched the door when it would open. He could even hear everything that was happening behind that door. He was just waiting to see his parents. He heard the doctor say that the patient's stability was their top priority. The very next second, he saw the man take a decisive step forward and approach the ward. This man's check seemed so loud to him that he had never heard such loud sounds before. And what was approaching behind the door, as his family told him, the guy didn't understand how to react. He continued to sit on his bed, looking towards the door and waiting for it to open. Every second of this time seemed like an eternity to him. He was completely in anticipation. He was a little scared because he didn't understand and didn't know what to do in such a situation. He sat without taking his eyes off, looking in one direction, and that direction was the door. He was waiting. After just a few seconds, he saw 3 shadows standing on the other side of the door and who were about to enter inside. The guy also continued to sit on his bed listening to everything that was happening and waiting for what would happen next. The door began to open very slowly, and he was even more interested in seeing his parents. He didn't take his eyes off of that direction. It was the first meeting in such a long time that he hadn't seen them. When the door opened, a man and a woman were standing in front of him next to the doctor. They were his father and mother. They looked at the guy and wondered if this was their child. This was their son, Woojin. The boy continued to sit silently on his hospital bed and look towards his parents. The very next moment, the parents could not contain their emotions, and his mother left in order to hug her son as quickly as possible. The father ran along with his mother. They wanted to hug their son as quickly as possible, whom they had been looking for 12 years. When Mom hugged the guy, she became even more upset because she no longer hoped that she would be able to hug him again. She continued to hug him very tightly, and at that time tears were flowing from her eyes. She said that this was her son. His mother cried and repeated that she was very sorry. She repeated it several times. His mother tried even harder to run him to her chest and said that all this happened because of her and thanked her son for returning. She said that he was her son, and his mother missed him very much. The guy could not perceive her screams because it was too loud for him. So he pulled away from her embrace and began to cover his ears, turning away from them. The parents didn't understand them. They wanted to know what happened and why he was behaving like that. The guy covered his ears from the loud screams and also closed his eyes. He began to scream himself because he did not know what to do. After some time in the house where the apartment was, the guy's parents were all preparing for the event. And these events were that he had to be discharged from the hospital that day and had to return home. The girl was sitting on the couch talking on the phone with her mother, saying that she had washed everything and done everything she asked. After this conversation, she continued to sit on the sofa, and she felt a little uneasy because she knew that I, the older brother, was finally about to come home. But on the other hand, it was a little awkward. She saw him little because he needed rest, and her older brother speaks and moves very unusually. She thought about the fact that when he was stolen, she was a small child, so she didn't remember anything about her brother. She knew that he was rescued from the barn. She understood that he had, of course, been locked there for 12 years, and that in his place she would most likely have been the same. Luckily, her brother did not have hearing loss, but psychologically he was still different from the average person. So she felt a little uneasy just from the thought that he had to return to their apartment. The girl heard the door open. She stood up and headed toward the exit. Her mother came into the apartment. She said that they had brought her brother. Bomi was the name of the girl. She said welcome to her brother. The mother immediately asked her son if he was hungry and that she would soon prepare dinner. The guy was the last to enter the apartment. He listened to his mother and answered her that yes, he really was hungry. Everyone was very happy about his return, especially his parents. The only one who didn't understand how to behave was Bomi. The sister said that she was very glad that he had returned home and once again told him that he was welcome. The guy stopped at the exit and began to look around because he hadn't been in this house for a long time and already didn't remember practically anything. After the girl's words, there came a moment when no one said anything. Everyone stood silently and watched. The guy turned his head and saw that there were photographs on the shelves. He thought it was interesting. After all, in these photographs, he was only very small and together with his parents. At that moment, his father came up to him, took him by the shoulder, and asked the boy if he was probably confused after so many years away from home. Then he showed the door and said that there was a guy's room there, and asked if he remembered. Woo Jin answered that yes. Then the father asked his son again if he wanted to look at our room and spend time with his sister. Bomi's mother came up to her and told her to show her brother the room. This was her chance for them to get closer. The father opened his son's room and the mother told her daughter to spend time with her brother. Bomi didn't really like the idea, but she agreed. As soon as they entered the room, their mother went to the kitchen to quickly prepare dinner. And after a while, everything was on the stove. You had to wait and dinner was ready. The guy walked into the room, stopped and started looking around. Everything around him seemed unfamiliar to him. Bomi at that moment thought that the situation was more awkward than she could have imagined. She didn't know what to talk about with him. The guy looked at all the furniture and everything that was in this room, because he hadn't had anything like this in a long time. The first thing he noticed when he turned his head was that he saw a nice bed. And he was also very surprised that there was a window in his room, and light constantly fell from this window and illuminated the room. He turned his head to the other side and saw a desk on which stood a computer, and he also saw a chair. No matter how strange it all seemed to him, he actually understood that this was really his room. Bomi didn't know what to start. She tried to turn to her brother to start a conversation about something. Well, oddly enough, she didn't know what to talk about and didn't know what to talk about with him at all. But despite this, when her brother heard that she had addressed him, he turned his head and looked at her very warmly. When the girl saw her brother even closer, she thought that he looked even better than in the hospital, and he was much more handsome. The only thing that could connect them was a phone. She handed him a phone and said that she would teach him how to use it. After which, they sat down together on the bed. The sister told her brother that the phone was now turned off, and if he pressed this button, it would turn on. After which she dialed the numbers on the phone and said that this was their mother's number. Then she dialed some more numbers and added that this was their father's number. After which she added her number and then said that she would delete it and that Woojin should try to save it himself. The guy in the hall took the phone out of her hands and said, "Neo, Neo." The girl was a little surprised what kind of words these were. She turned around, looked at him, and asked if he probably meant that he understood and that there was no need to speak to her formally since she was his younger sister. The guy looked at her and said the word again. Then he added that of course he understood everything. Sister tried to explain again that first he just needs to turn on the phone. The very next moment he pressed the button and his phone was turned on. All this was unexpected for him. He had never seen or held a phone in his hands in a long time, so he was a little surprised. Then his sister said that now he needs to click on the new contact and she will dictate her number to him. After he pressed everything, she began to dictate her number to him, saying one number after another, and he repeated everything exactly. So the girl was a little surprised and asked again if he was really using a phone for the first time. She was surprised only because his fingers moved much faster than hers, and it seemed like he was doing this more than once. Woojin, when he entered her number, asked her if he had done it or if he needed to redo it. His sister said that everything was correct and her brother is very smart. He learns things easily. After which the girl said that now she will teach him how to search on the internet. The guy was very surprised. What does search mean? Bomi started showing him how to do it. He had to type whatever he wanted, and only after that he would have to press this place. She held the phone in front of her and showed how to do it by typing the word and then putting the knife on the magnifying glass. After she showed it to him, Bomi gave him the phone and told her brother to try it himself. At that moment, everything seemed to be mixed up in his head. He didn't know which letter he needed to press and what exactly he wanted in the search. So he decided that he should start from the very beginning and began pressing one letter after another. He was interested in what is called a family and what an ordinary family looks like where there is a mother and father. And most importantly, he looked at his sister and understood that this was his younger sister. For him, the word family was something new and he wanted to learn as much as possible about this word. He looked at his sister and realized that now he had a whole family and he really had a family. He watched his sister as she smiled one moment, and then the next moment she was very serious. The guy suddenly felt an ordinary smell. He was even more surprised because he didn't know what was happening. The smell was so strong that he thought it was the smell of some perfume. For him, it was just a wonderful smell. After all, he clearly knew, he read, that all the most beautiful smells were the smells of perfumes, and they came from ancient Egypt. At that moment, it seemed to him that he was in ancient times, and around him there was one wonderful smell surrounding him from all sides. The guy stood up and said that it was a very strong smell, and that this smell was most likely some kind of perfume. His sister was a little surprised. She didn't understand why he was saying that. The guy, as if not realizing it, went towards this smell. His sister asked where he went, but he opened the door and left the room and followed the smell. It seemed that nothing could stop him. He went out into the living room and felt that this smell began to surround him even more. It was just everywhere. The guy thought that this smell was simply incomparable, and he had never smelled such a smell before in his life. He took a few steps forward and saw that it was not a scent of perfume at all, and was even more surprised. He noticed that there were many plates on the table with a lot of food on them, and the smell was coming from that place. Then the guy thought that it wasn't perfume at all. It was food that was standing right in front of him. His mother at that moment turned to him and said that he had arrived on time and he must be hungry, so he should sit down at the table. His father put another dish on the table. It was stewed kimchi, and it was this that his father cooked, and his sister sat down with him at the table. When they all sat down at the table, Mom and Dad started offering the guy one dish after another in turn. The parents wanted him not to leave the table hungry, so they tried to feed him well. Mom even fed him from her hands, and the boy, despite being quite old, did not refuse to eat. When he took a bite of one of the dishes, he was a little surprised, and his father laughed very loudly at that moment. After all, he hadn't eaten many of these dishes and couldn't even imagine what they might taste like. You even asked the suspect during the interrogation that 5 years ago, his family members began to die one per year. The first was his wife, and the second was his mother who left, and they asked if he had anything to say on this issue. They also asked that his sister-in-law died from eating a poisonous plant. And also 2 neighbors who lived close to him also died at the same time. The man who was suspected sat silently with his head down and said nothing because he had nothing to say. Unexpectedly for the investigator, this man shouted that he swears, and it was not him. The follower had a completely different opinion. He slammed his fist on the table and added that strange deaths continued to happen around him, and it was him. The suspect continued to deny, saying it wasn't him. Then the investigator said he continued to refuse to cooperate. The suspects told the investigator that this was all wrong, and did they really think that he was not a murderer? The investigator slightly misunderstood his words and asked again what he was talking about and what he meant. At that moment, the suspect started shouting that he was talking about that same bastard he fed and gave protection to. The suspect claimed that it was this guy who killed them all and that the grandfather was as crazy as everyone said. The suspect tried with all his might to explain something to the investigator, but he didn't want to listen to him at all. The investigator told the suspect to watch his language and go to jail immediately if he didn't want to get even more time. Then the suspect once again tried to explain to the investigator that he didn't understand anything and that they didn't know at all what kind of monster he really was. That's why he kept him locked up and never let him out, because he considered him a monster. And this guy read a lot of books while he was in captivity, and many books about humans and about human anatomy, about what humans are made of. And the suspect thought it was all the work of that fucking bastard he kept locked up. And it was this bastard who killed the number of people they are talking about, not him. Time passed very quickly and the day was coming to an end. It was quite dark outside. In order to avoid darkness in the apartment, the light was turned on and it became light. At this time, the guy was sitting in his room at the table on his chair and figuring out the phone that his sister had given him. He pressed the YouTube button. His sister said that many people watch it. When he went to YouTube, he saw a lot of different videos as well as music and much more. He clicked on the first video. It was one of the lol bloggers who suggested watching the game on Dayhawk Row. The guy once again analyzed everything he said about how he was greeted and how this blogger did it. After all, he stopped the video for a few seconds. He wanted to hear it all again from the very beginning. He watched this video again where the blogger says that they are now going to watch the game and that he greets the family. The guy began to analyze all his words. He understood that it was a blogger and that he was greeting. He closed his eyes. After all, in his understanding, when he spoke about family, it meant that he welcomed his entire family, the one that he considered his dear family. Look at this video. He realized that he had something very good in this life, and it was his dear family. The next video was about tteokbokki mukbang. He didn't understand what it was about at all, but he was very interested. You have videos there of 2 girls greeting everyone, and one of them said that she finally eats tteokbokki, which she dreamed of all week. The girl was talking about how incredibly delicious it was. Soft and rich in flavor, it was simply amazing. She was saying that it was incredibly wonderful and that everyone should see how the cheese stretched. The guy watched what was happening. He heard new words such as incredibly wonderful or simply wonderful. At that moment, he heard someone approaching his room. He turned his head in anticipation. It was his sister who asked what he was doing and if she could come in, which surprised him even more because she asked permission. The guy decided that he needed to get up and open the door for his sister. When he opened the door, he asked his sister in surprise if she was calling him. Did she really need help with something? The guy asked her again if she was really going to do the cleaning today and he should help her. The sister said no, he didn't need to do anything. She suddenly asked her brother if he wanted to go out for ice cream. The guy was a little surprised because he didn't expect it. Then she asked him again if he wanted to go get some ice cream. It was cold and very tasty. She wondered if he had never tried it. After which she took her brother by the hand and said that they would go for ice cream. The parents ordered them not to go anywhere else and that the sister should hold her brother's hand tightly and not leave him. Bomi told her parents that they would be back soon so that they wouldn't worry. The next minute they were on the street. Despite the fact that it was dark, they went for ice cream. There were a lot of lanterns on the street and this illuminated the streets of the night city. In just a few minutes, they were near one of the stores. There was a huge sign in front of the entrance to the store. The guy raised his head and looked up. Everything was amazing to him, and he saw everything as if for the first time. He stood in front of the entrance to the store and was so impressed that he said it was just super. When they went inside, he saw a lot of food products that were on the shelves. The seller told them that she was glad to see them. The guy entering the store was so confused that he wanted to look at everything that was there. He stood with his mouth open. His sister told him to come to her quickly, and she was standing near one of the freezers where the ice cream was stored. The girl said that all he had to do was choose what he wanted to eat. When the guy saw this, Isabella didn't know what to choose. At that moment, his sister didn't lose her nerve and said maybe he wanted her to help him. They stood near the freezer for a while longer so that he could make his choice. Bomi thought for a bit, opened the refrigerator and took out some ice cream, handed it to her brother, and said that this was very tasty. His sister thought for a moment whether she should give her brother the opportunity to pay for himself and whether he would be able to do it. She thought for a bit and decided that everything needed to be done gradually. After a while, she told the cashier to ring up the ice cream that was in his hands. After they paid and left the store, Bomi thanked the shop assistant again and wished him a good day. There were 3 girls sitting on the street behind the knock, one of whom told the other 2 to look in that direction. Their eyes were on Bomi and his older brother. The girl was telling him what he needed to tear off and then pull to open the ice cream. The girls sitting at the table couldn't take their eyes off him. They thought he was really handsome and they should ask for his number. They started talking among themselves. Next to him, it was by chance not his girlfriend Bomi. It was very nice to hear it. Bomi opened her ice cream and said that she could help her brother do the same. She opened his ice cream and said that he didn't need to thank her because she was his younger sister, after which she handed it to him and told him to try it because it was very cold and sweet. The guy, not understanding what was in his hands, brought the card up and bit off a little. After the ice cream got into his mouth, for a few seconds, he didn't understand what it was because he had never eaten anything like it before. It was only after a few seconds that he realized how delicious it really was and what else he wanted to try. But the very next moment, there was something incomprehensible in his behavior, and he seemed to be very surprised by something. The sister looked at her brother and asked if something was wrong, because she hadn't even expected such a reaction. My sister asked him again if he didn't like the taste of the ice cream or if it was too cold. She thought that they should have taken something else. If he didn't like it, then he didn't have to force himself to eat it, to which the guy replied that it was very tasty. It was like a rupture in his consciousness. He didn't imagine that there was such a taste that could change everything in his head. It seemed that even tears appeared in his eyes, only because they were tears of bliss that he received from biting into the ice cream. The guy said that it was not just delicious, but super delicious. His sister didn't understand where he learned this phrase. Bomi looked at the girls sitting at the table, and especially for them, she began to talk even louder with her brother. She tried to explain to him that he should eat the ice cream not as fast as he started eating it. After all, she was very worried that it was cold and he might get sick because it was my first time. Bomi didn't lose her head. She gave her phone to her brother and told him to take a photo of her. The guy didn't refuse. After which they took several photos together in different poses. The girl said that it was time for them to get back quickly and they could eat ice cream on the go. Until they returned home, his sister kept walking and thinking that everything had turned out very well and that she liked it. In order to get home, they had to walk almost another block down the street to their house. They were silently either on the streets or his sister was writing something on her phone at that moment. After taking the photos, she shared them with her friends, saying that it was her eating ice cream with her brother. She walked and read their comments. One of her friends thought that they needed to swap and the other wanted to be ice cream in his hands. The girl was so engrossed in her correspondence that she didn't notice how her older brother began to walk a little slower and began to lag behind New York. She had already reached the crossing, and he stopped and looked after her and also at the man who was standing on the opposite side of the street. This man was wearing a black cap and a black mask on his face so that no one would recognize him. And the surprising thing is that this man looked at his sister and did not take his eyes off her. This man watched every movement and every step of his sister without turning to the other side. His pupils seemed to dilate when he looked at the way her legs looked from behind. It seemed that he was devouring her completely with his gaze, without taking his gaze off her. This man was like a jackal who was stalking his prey and watching it. The guy stopped only because he saw some person looking at his sister. He noticed that there were a lot of scratches on this man's cap, and he was frowning from tension, and also his wiki was tightly pinched, and his pupils were dilated. When they were walking home with their parents, they met this man and his parents did not recognize him. This only meant that they were not acquainted, and most importantly, he concluded that this person was not a local. The guy continued to stand in the middle of the street, watching what would happen next, and trying to draw his own conclusions. This man turned his head and saw that he had been discovered. He was a little surprised, but he had no choice but to turn around and leave the place where he stood as quickly as possible. The guy continued to analyze this man and saw that the armpits of his clothes were soaked with sweat. He also noticed that he had folds on the knees of his pants. It was clearly visible. And when he lifted his leg, the guy saw that there were traces of the pedal on his shoe. He analyzed and decided that the width of the pedal marks indicated that they were narrower than those from a bicycle, which meant that it was a motorcycle. And also looking around, he realized that there was no dirt in this place. All this said only one thing, that this man came from far away and came specifically to this place. The guy concluded that this man has no job and no set schedule. His family doesn't know him. He's not local. He's about 50, and he arrived on motorcycles. His movements are systematic, but at the same time a little chaotic. He decided to overcome small mountains instead of driving along the road with video surveillance lefty and lives alone. At that moment, the guy shouted to his sister. The girl stopped and turned her head. She wanted to ask her brother why he stopped. Looking around, she asked if he had seen something that had stopped him. Woojin answered his sister that no, he didn't see anything. He just thought to stand there before he went inside. Bomi looked around and then returned to her brother. She couldn't leave him alone. She asked why he was standing there. Maybe he saw something. Her brother told her that she wanted to go home first. Bomi grabbed the pelvis, explaining that it was too late, and if she went home alone, her mother would scold her. She wasn't going to leave him alone on the street, so despite the fact that he didn't want to go, she started dragging him. The girl did not let him go, saying that his mother was waiting for him, and they needed to get home as quickly as possible. It was already quite late outside. A lantern was shining and many butterflies were flying around it. When they approached, the background suddenly stopped glowing and the street was completely plunged into darkness. Then the lantern turned on again, and butterflies immediately began to fly towards the lantern from all sides. When he got home, the guy was in his room. It was 12:30 at night and everyone was already resting. Only he alone could not fall asleep. He stood by the window, looked at the street, and thought about everything that had happened. It was as if he was talking to someone, saying that this is his family and that he should get away from it. He believed that this is really his family. He thought that he needed to run up to this man and shout that he would call the police because that was the only way he could protect his family. Well, he thought that he was a monster that didn't belong to the world, and he had to be like that in order to survive. If he had been so naive, he would have already died. He stood there watching and realizing that he had been able to survive on his own, but he also realized that he should never have been born. Everything that happened to him was very scary. The only question is, if he talks about a monster, then who is he? He looked at his reflection, and while talking to it, he wanted to know how he was better than him. In fact, he understood that he had good control over his body, and that he had another personality that he had created over all this time. And the second thing I answered him was, does he really think that he can separate from him because it was his body and it is fueled by his anxiety and fear? When fear and anxiety break through inside, they immediately possess it completely. But now he can control them. If he can call it from his consciousness, he can improve his knowledge. He believed that any fierce beast with sharp fangs, no matter what it was, he would be able to tame it, he believed. And this time, he needed to go out. His gaze was directed at what was happening on the street, and he was confident that he was right. Standing in his room near the window, he watched everything that was happening on the street. And at that moment, he made such a choice. Near his house, a lantern was still burning and illuminating the part of the street that was closer to his house. Therefore, From his window, he could observe a black man who was standing on the opposite side of the street under an umbrella. Seeing this man, he clearly understood that he really had to go out and solve this problem. Turning the other way, the guy immediately headed towards the door. He knew what he would do next. He approached the door, very quietly lowered the handle, and began to open the door just as quietly so as not to wake up his family. He walked out into the living room, very quietly. There was no light there because his whole family was resting. He needed to pass unnoticed. He walked through the entire living room and headed towards the exit and his house. He did all this very quietly. When he went outside, he saw that it was raining from the sky, and this surprised him even more. I go down the steps. He did it as quietly as possible so that no one would notice that he left the house. He opened the door and went outside. He took a few steps up the stairs and there was a puddle on these steps. It was raining very heavily, so there was quite a lot of water on the asphalt. He immediately saw a man in black under an umbrella. Despite the fact that this man was standing opposite, he saw the guy and did not run away anywhere this time. Woo Jin approached this man as close as possible on the street. It was raining heavily. The guy was all wet. And when he was standing opposite this man in black under an umbrella, this man turned around and looked at him. The guy took a few more steps forward, and only after that he stopped. He still didn't understand what to tell him. After which the guy raised his one hand and watched as a drop of rain fell on his palm. After which the guy said that this is a gift from the universe, and to hide someone's crime, you actually need skill. The guy turned his head and addressed the man, saying that he thought he was well prepared because he had planned a specific day. The man in the black mask turned his head, not understanding what he was talking about. Did he really figure it all out? Then the guy turned around and replied, does he really not understand what he is talking about? In fact, he doesn't need to be so boring. The man in the black mask then asked the guy who he was and why he was even getting involved in all this. This man stood in the rain with a huge umbrella in one hand. The guy looked at him again and asked if he really wanted to know who he was. After all, he actually knows him very well and can tell a lot about him. After which the guy started telling him that this man ate jajangmyeon for lunch and that he was actually a delivery guy. Then he continued to talk about how this man crossed the hills on his motorcycle. The man was really surprised. The guy continued to talk about how this man was crawling around their villa like a stray dog and that he had cat hair on his sleeves. All this suggests that he killed a stray cat to practice. The man in the black mask asked again who he was. Then the guy raised his hand, adjusted his hair and said, does he really want to know who he is? He raised his eyes and looked straight into the eyes of this man in the mask, and it was not a harmless look at all. After which the guy, unexpectedly for this person, she carried him a blow so that she knocked him down. And after this man fell into a puddle, he hit him with all his might on the ground again. The lantern seemed to shine even brighter, and all this resembled a performance that was developing under the light of the lantern. The man tried to crawl back, not understanding who he was dealing with. His face was no longer wearing a mask or cap. The guy was very angry, and so he explained to this man that people like him have no right to exist. The next moment he tore the clothes on his chest so that the man in black could see everything. The guy tore his clothes and showed the many scars that were on his body and that had not yet healed. The number of these scars was so great that it seemed that the human body could not bear it. The man in black, when he saw so many scars, was so scared that his pupil became very small. At that moment, the flashlight that was shining very brightly turned off, and there was nothing but crap all around. The guy approached this person and explained to him that he should never appear in front of him again under any circumstances. The guy explained to him that next time all these scars that he saw on his body, they will be left on the body of this person. The man in black was so scared that he couldn't even say a single word. He only tried to leave this place as quickly as possible. Then the guy stood up and explained to him once again that if he understood him, then he would stop stalking their family like an insect. The man in black jumped up in an instant, and with all the speed he could, he began to run away from that place. The very next moment, the guy was standing alone in the middle of the street with only an umbrella lying next to him. Woo Jin turned around and headed home. He walked in the pouring rain that didn't stop for a second. The next moment, the lamp table lit up again and the guy raised his head and looked up. He was very pleased that the rain that was falling washed away everything bad that was in his life. At that moment, he caught himself thinking that the daughter who was walking was sounding very nice. And new good memories appeared in his head. He remembered the first day and how he tried new products. He also recalled how he spent his second day with his family and tried the legendary tekochi. And then he had a flashback to the third day when he and his sister were eating popcorn at the movie theater, and he thought it was a wonderful combination of caramel and corn. The fourth day of his life together with his family was already calm and was not as bright as the previous ones. Gradually, he entered into a normal rhythm. Just like other teenagers of his age, he began to study. His sister suggested that he take a multiple-choice test on fundamental science. The guy took a pen and turned one page over to the other. He immediately left check marks next to the necessary answers. His sister said that before he would answer one of the questions, he first needed to simply read it, to which he said that he had read everything. The girl then said that she shouldn't have taught him how to use YouTube because he speaks like many bloggers. Everything that happened before her eyes looked as if he was simply guessing the right option, but she said that she was ready to teach him how to check the answers. And she said that this time they could do it together. The guy was very interested, and he said that he was ready for it. The girl showed how it is done and said that in the first number there is 1, in the second there are 4, and in the third the answer is 2. Imagine her surprise that he answered all the questions absolutely correctly. Then she asked if he really had read everything. She asked her brother if he had read the truth before answering these questions. The guy wanted to know, and he did it. Then his sister decided to change the task and asked if he wanted to try again, but answered different questions. She put other tests in front of him, and the guy replied that he agreed. After which he took a pen in his hand, and with great speed turned one page after another, silently put a check mark next to the answer to the questions. His sister was very surprised when he gave her a notebook with tests and ready-made answers. She compared the answers and said that this couldn't be, after which she added that he was a genius. Her boyfriend noticed that he was not a genius, he just wanted to be normal. Then he repeated that he wants to be normal. For him, being normal is very difficult, but he still wants to. After which he raised his head up and saw his own photograph standing on the shelf where he was as a child with an apple in his hands. At that moment, he remembered everything that happened in his childhood and how hard it was for him to be normal. After all, despite the fact that he was an ordinary child, he was beaten from childhood by the person who held him down and was called a little bastard. So every day passed, he received blow after blow, he was forced to clean the toilet and was kept like a dog on an iron chain. The only thing he could do during all this time when he was there and was in such a state was to read the books that surrounded him on all sides. After such memories, the guy turned and looked at his sister. He had nothing more to say to her. His sister felt all his pain. Tears flowed from her eyes. She understood that it must be very difficult when you live through such things in life. The guy looked at her facial expression and read that his sister's pupils had slightly dropped. Her eyebrow muscles had risen. Her eyelids were relaxed. The corners of her lips were downturned. Everything he saw he did automatically, and only in this way he could determine what state a person was in. He understood that she was very upset, so he came closer to her and put his hand on her head. Then he turned to her and told her not to be upset and not to be sad, because everything that happened had already passed. After which the guy turned around abruptly, walked over to his desk, took a piece of paper and a pen, and started writing something. Bomi couldn't keep up with his emotions, so she asked her brother what he was doing, and he continued writing. After which her brother turned around abruptly and showed her a piece of paper on which was written. Bomi asked her brother what it was and what exactly he wrote there. She didn't understand what was happening. And I was even more surprised when I was able to see what he actually wrote on this piece of paper. When she read, she was very surprised by the knowledge that her brother possessed. The first thing he wrote was that his sister should not be upset under any circumstances, since a drop in temperature could weaken her immune system. He believed that sadness affects the tongue, which leads to weight gain and heart disease. He also wrote that all this affects the hormone cortisone, increasing stress levels and reducing sleep quality. He wrote that since sadness activates the hippocampus, the brain requires more energy and feels tired, and he also believed that serotonin levels decrease with frustration and can lead to depression. He laid out all these theses on a sheet of paper which he wrote for her and gave to her to read. When his sister read it to the very end, she asked him where he learned all this from. Then her brother told her that when he was in prison, he read a lot of books. At that moment, their mother called them for dinner. Woojin couldn't stay in place. He immediately jumped up and ran as fast as he could to the table. Bomi remained sitting on the bed. In her hands was the same piece of paper that she continued to read, but she also needed to go eat. Time passed very quickly, and the day of the shifts in the evening it was dark outside, and it was time to sleep. Woojin was lying on his bed like other teenagers his age. He had a phone in his hands. He decided he should do some digging, and he found a video about food that said it was delicious, and he thought it must be amazing. Woojin flipped through one food video after another, each one even tastier than the last. A lot of food flashed before his eyes. It seemed simply amazing to him. His eyes were running wild, and he didn't even know which of these videos he should watch first. After reading the title of the video and its tags, the guy decided that he needed to watch one of them, and he clicked on it. A pleasant-looking girl greeted everyone, and there was a huge platter of food in front of her. This girl said that this time she decided to try mala soup, and she is all in anticipation of the dish. She said that she had already had lunch, so she would eat a small portion, after which she made her order and said that she needed 10 servings of mala soup. After they brought it to her, she began to sort it out. The first thing she started saying was that she wanted to start with a wide plate, and I wondered what the noodles in this soup tasted like. The guy watched everything that was happening in this video carefully, and he was interested because he really liked all the videos about food. The girl took the first few sips of soup and said that she ordered the hottest, and it was incredibly hot. It was so spicy that she couldn't contain her emotions. Her face turned red, but she still said that it was very tasty. After she finished the wide noodles, she said she now wanted to try the corn noodles. She started to take corn noodles from the dish into the plate. It was a little hot, but she kept trying. After she tasted the corn noodles, she closed her eyes and said that the texture was amazing, and she really liked it. What she wanted to try in this whole dish was everything that was wrapped in cabbage, and she started fishing it out. When the guy watched this trolling to the end, he went to watch Rolex again with her participation, but only about something else. Clicking on her channel, he saw that this girl constantly makes videos about food. So it wasn't hard for him to decide, and he decided that he wanted to watch her video. After clicking on it, he heard that she, like in the previous video, greeted everyone and said that today she had ramen on her menu. The guy rewound a bit, and she said that first you need to boil some water. He rewound even more. He really liked looking at her face, and in general, he really liked this girl. The next thing she said was that we needed to get ready to eat, and she would let her hair down for that. The next thing he saw was that she was now going to try her food. The guy didn't stop watching one video after another from her channel. He really liked it. So when this video ended, he decided that he needed to watch another Rolex with her participation. This time she said that she was ready to eat a piece of meat in order to tell everyone how delicious it was. The guy thought that she was very similar to him, and all the words she said were as if he thought so. He decided that all her behavior as he does is most likely normal for everyone present. He took her as an example. The next day, when they gathered at the family table, his parents asked him who he wanted to be in the future. He did not understand why they were asking this. The parents told their son that it was okay if he didn't have an answer. As long as he was healthy and happy, that was enough. Woojin answered his parents that he wants to be a normal person, that is, a normal office worker. His parents said that this is an excellent choice, and he can be whoever he wants. The next day, the guy decided he needed to go to the police station. After all, he considered himself a practically normal person, so he had to share his impressions. And for a normal person, accordingly, it was normal behavior, and that is why he decided to do this. And for a normal person, reporting a crime against someone was completely normal. There was an investigator and a criminal in the office. The investigator asked the criminal if he really did it. All this took place in the Department for Combating Violence in the 1st Division. At some point, the criminal began to say that he did not do this, but everything was filmed on a surveillance camera. Then the criminal began to deny everything and say that it wasn't him and that he doesn't wear such hats. The investigator tried to explain to the criminal that there were other witnesses and they were ready to confirm. The criminal was shouting that he wasn't even there, and he didn't understand how anyone could see him. At that moment, a guy came in and greeted the detective. The detective turned around, looked at the guy, and was very surprised because he hadn't seen him for a long time. The guy greeted him again and called him by his name, Kim Tae-young. The detectives were even more surprised when they realized that it was Woo Jin. The detective looked at him and said that he had grown a lot, and that was why he didn't recognize him. He asked how the guy was doing. After all, it was this detective who found him in that very barn and let him out of there to free him. And it was this detective who took him to the police bus. When the guy approached, he made sure that he didn't get hurt again. It was Detective Smug who put him on the bus seat and was able to calm him down so that he wouldn't get upset. After he sat the guy down on the bus, he repeated to him several times that everything was fine and that the guy was now safe. After which the guy was very scared, but the detective managed to fasten him with a seatbelt as they moved on the bus. It was then that the detective said that he would deliver him to his parents safe and sound. Despite the fact that so much time had passed, the boy had not forgotten his savior, and when he asked, he replied that he was doing well. The detective noticed that the boy now spoke well, after which the detective asked his assistant to take the guy they had detained to the cell. When his assistant took this guy to the detention cell, the detainees kept shouting that he didn't do it. Woojin asked the detective if this is typical for criminals. He looked at the guy and said yes. After all, criminals always first deny that they committed any crimes. The detective said that all criminals say the same thing when they are caught on personal matters, as if they follow the same instructions. The detective was interested in how the guy found him. Woo Jin approached the detective and said that he wanted to show him something. The detective said if he wanted to drink, they could talk outside. The guy replied that he was fine and handed over a video he had watched on YouTube and told the detective to take a look at it. The detective watched this video and asked what was wrong with it because it was just an ordinary YouTube channel. The guy kept the YouTube video on and said that this girl reminded him a lot of him. Firstly, her eyes were raised to the upper right corner, which meant that she was lying, and her fingers were near her lips. She was showing signs of nervousness. Further in the video, it was clear that she even bites her lips a little. This usually happens when someone is scared or nervous. Of course, she is just worried about the taste of the dish, but her eyes rose again to the right. She says that it is very tasty, but her eyes give away something else. Her words do not match her actions. In these videos, she squeezed her shoulders when she ate. He said that people usually hunch over when they are uncomfortable or threatened. It is a form of self-defense. Then he showed that in the video, her eyes rise to the left. At that moment, she is not lying and not making things up. She is retelling memories, but subconsciously covering her mouth. This meant that she is hiding something. He was acutely aware that subconsciously covering the mouth often indicates an intention to hide something, such as violence. Or any coercion, on the other hand, is always hidden by closing the mouth. And also in her video, she touches her necklace while boiling water. Is this how she releases her stress? Or is it a subconscious desire for psychological stability? The detective was very surprised and asked the guy what he was saying now. He seemed not to hear the question and continued to talk about how the girl was asking for help. He zoomed in on one of the scenes in the video and showed the letter she wrote on the table. Looking at it from all sides, it was indeed the letter C that she had deliberately tried to write on the table. Already in the next scene, she held a letter near her finger which she constantly pointed to. And in the next scene, she also made the letter C out of noodles and left it lying on the table. The guy said that if you add up all these small expressions and subconscious actions, it turns out to be too much of a coincidence. In other words, she is forcibly held back just like him. He showed her actions one by one again, and it was really clear that she was very scared. Detective then asked the guy if she is really a prisoner. The guy interrupted him and answered that she gave a hint herself with her actions, and each time she demonstrates more and more courage. The detective asked the guy again if he was sure that the girl was in the same condition as him. The guy replied that the victim looked to be in her early 20s and that the girl had no family or grew up in a problematic environment. He also noted that the preparation is not being carried out by one person, but by several, and all these guys are in their early 20s and they are teenagers. Detective Shaw told the young man that he didn't understand the truth. Was he really saying that she had been kidnapped, and did he really know who the kidnappers were? The guy replied that no, he doesn't know them at all, but he can analyze and understand what's happening to people. After all, in reality, he was also locked up for a long time and was in a closed, dark room. That is why he can recognize the behavior of a person who is being held in the same closed room as him. When he sees her, he immediately understands that she is the same as he was when he was in prison. The guy asked the detective if he thought all these coincidences he saw could be true. Look at the detectives, and the guy asked the clothes that he was wearing because his mother bought them, just like his mother buys all his clothes for him. At that moment, the detective was very surprised. He did not understand how this guy could know that the clothes he was wearing were bought by his mother. The guy said that this is just the first coincidence. He also wants to say about the suspect. This guy was not a professional, but it seems that he plays the violin or cello with passion as a hobby. At that moment, they both looked at the door, which was closed, and through which the same suspect was taken out. The detective asked again if the suspect really plays the instrument. Then the guy said, if he's right, that would be a second coincidence. The detective laughed and asked the guy if he was really going to become a profiler, to which he heard the answer no. The guy wanted to become an ordinary office worker. But at the moment, he is here simply to report. And he does it so that the detective will believe him. The detachment had no choice but to ask the suspect, who was sent to the pre-trial detention center, whether he really had such a hobby. The guy said that after this, if it turns out that he was wrong, he could be tried for obstruction of justice. He would take full responsibility. When the detective heard about obstruction of justice, he screamed no, because in fact they could come back, and he would at least ask the suspect. The detective told the guy to wait a minute, so he could approach the suspect and ask him. The guy remained standing in the office, and the detective went to the very door through which the suspect was taken out. When the detective came out, the guy stood there and kept his eyes on that very door. The detective walked a little dissatisfied because he didn't understand what he was doing at that moment. After all, this guy already speaks very well, and most importantly, he knows how pancakes should behave. And it's also very strange that he could so easily determine that the clothes the detective was wearing were bought by his mother. The detective of the show was racking his brains as to how this guy could guess whether he was really that badly dressed. Yes, the detective approached the suspect and addressed him. He needed to get only one answer from him. So the detective asked the prisoner if he played the violin or the cello, to which he replied that he did indeed, but that it was just his hobby. These words surprised the detective even more. Now he didn't really understand how to treat this guy's words. The prisoners asked the detective if he had really studied him so well that he had even learned about his hobby. Then the detective wondered if this guy was a psychic or something and could guess. In fact, the guy was watching very carefully when the suspect entered and then how he moved. He did not admit his involvement in criminal activity and claimed that no one could see him. The guy needed a few seconds to analyze and record everything in his mind. The first thing he noticed was his face and how his mouth was twisted. He immediately realized that he was suffering from a disease called folliculitis, which is why he had long hair and many other signs indicating this disease. After which he turned to his hands and saw the marks that were on his fingers. They were from the strings. Having put all this together, he determined that this guy has something to do with the violin or cello, which means he is a Riichi. When the detective returned and entered the office, he looked around and saw no one. He was a little upset. He asked the other employees when the boy left, but no one knew because they weren't watching him. Going to his desk, the detective noticed that the guy had left him a note. For this note on his desk, he read everything that was written there. The guy wrote to him that it was the second coincidence. He was completely sure that he was not mistaken, and added that regarding the third, it would be a YouTuber who is in high school and she asks for help. The detective thought that there really were two coincidences, and without waiting for the result of the second one, he left the office. That's why the detective told his assistant, who was sitting there, to find the high school YouTuber right then and there. This time, the guy decided to get back from the police station to his home by public transport. He stood at the bus stop and waited for his bus to arrive so that he could get to the area where he lived. When his bus pulled up, the front door opened and a passenger started to get in front of him. He remembered what his sister told him before he gets on public transport. He should prepare his transport card. When he got on the bus, he thought that this was only his second time. The guy went inside the bus, showed his transport card, and said that he was a student. After which he walked along the bus and found a place where it would be most comfortable for him to sit. He stood near the window to observe everything that would happen on the street and not miss anything. He sat on the bus and remembered the last meeting he had with his father and uncle. The three of them were sitting at the same table and eating. When his uncle drank some beer, he asked the guy if he really wanted to be an office worker, to which he replied that yes, he wants to be a normal office worker, for example, in the company where his uncle works. The adults laughed. Then the uncle asked, because he had heard that they study well here and solve problems in a matter of seconds. Maybe this is the right place for him. Then the guy asked his uncle if he could get a tour. His uncle answered that of course he could, since his nephew wanted to see it, so why not? Woo Jin was riding the bus and thinking about how he promised that this excursion would happen on this very day. And when he got on that bus, he calculated that he would be in that very office after just 4 stops. The guy calculated that the time from one stop to another is 6 minutes. The next one is 10 minutes. Another one is 7 minutes and 9 minutes. In total, it is 32 minutes. It was exactly after this amount of time that he was near the very office where he had made the agreement. Come to this office, he called, and said that he had arrived. Now they had to go out to meet him. In response, he heard that they would come for him in exactly 1 minute. Then the guy agreed and had no choice but to wait. It was a huge office building that housed Manhwa General Store. Indeed, after just 1 minute, a man in a suit came out who was most likely looking for him. The guy looked at everyone who came in and out of this office building, and he thought that they were the normal people, all of whom were very neatly dressed and who he considered normal. He looked at the guys who passed by him and easily determined that one of them was the head of the department. His dream was to live a normal life. At that moment, the guy heard his name being called. He turned his head and looked at the exit. It was his uncle who was a little surprised that the guy found the way, but the only thing he didn't understand was why he was waiting outside and not inside. Woo Jin thanked his uncle for allowing him to come here. His uncle said that giving him a tour was the least he could do for him. After which the uncle hugged his nephew and did not go inside to show him what was going on inside. When they went inside, the guy saw a huge hall through which people were leaving. Everything was very big and beautiful. The guy immediately noticed that all this looked quite attractive and he really liked it all. The uncle walked and told them that right in front of them there were cafeterias. They would look there later. Further on, there was the office management, and they had branches all over the country. When the boy looked around, the uncle asked if he had already looked at everything and understood everything. To which he replied that yes, he understood that you need to know a lot to live a normal life, so he thinks that being normal is more difficult than it seems. The uncle invited him to come up to his office. He came up and brought his pass to go inside. Then they went to the elevator, and the uncle said that there are 5 elevators in the office, so as not to create a queue. When they were standing and waiting near the elevator, the guy heard a conversation between 2 employees who were wondering if he was the son of the head of the department. A girl joined them, and she added that he was not a son but a nephew, and he had to deliver something. The girl was very friendly, and when she realized who this guy was, she said that now everything was clear to her. Woo Jin turned her head and looked at this girl as usual. He immediately began to analyze her. The boy and the girl asked each other in one voice whether they were high school students or not. The girl didn't understand what he was saying. In fact, everyone here knew her and knew who she was. After which the girl answered him, "Isn't it obvious from the form that she is a high school student?" The elevator opened on the first floor. The uncle, however, called his nephew and told the girl that they would see each other later. And if she goes to the cafeteria, then bon appetit, she is left alone standing near the elevator. The elevator door closed, and the elevator began to slowly rise upward, changing the numbers on the display from 1 and further. After just a few seconds, the elevator stopped on the 7th floor, the very floor where this guy's uncle worked. When the elevator opened, the uncle told his nephew that he could go out and that this was the floor he worked on. When they got to the office, the guy was a little surprised by the number of people and how everything happens there. Now, he understood what an office is. Many of the employees were talking about completely unrelated topics on the phone, while others were making eyes at each other. The uncle walked his nephew between the workstations and then very carefully tried to analyze each of the employees. The secretary who was standing behind her workstation said that it was necessary to mark it before the order was issued and gave the papers back to one of the employees. One of the employees was shouting that he needed to send mail. He didn't understand what he needed to do with it. The uncle turned to his nephew and asked him how he felt. He sat him down at his workplace and asked him if he felt like an office worker. The guy replied that no, but he would try to become one. One of the employees approached his uncle and said that the Saudi contract had been canceled. The uncle got very angry and shouted at his employee to call everyone to the conference room. The uncle walked the guy to the elevator and said that he would like to eat with him in the cafeteria, but something urgent happened. The guy thanked him and said that he would go down himself. When he was in the elevator, he watched the numbers that were changing above the board, and seeing that he was already on the first floor, he arrived. The door opened, and the guy came out of the elevator, and the same girl he had already met came out of the parallel elevator. The girl was holding a phone in her hand and was reading something attentively. She was busy with something of her own. But when she saw the guy, she turned her head and smiled, saying that they met again. The guy looked at her again and tried to analyze her because she was not so simple. He knew it was 11 a.m., and a high school student shouldn't be in the office at that time, and the questions she was asking didn't seem like she was being bullied by adults. Her calm tone and relaxed facial expression, as well as her speech and her questions, indicated that she felt at ease here. And also the way she behaves and the way she tries to talk to him, she kept saying that this is not her first time here. The girl stood in front of him, not letting him pass, and asked if he got what he wanted to see here. The guy analyzed that she walks confidently and overloads his path, controlling the space as if it belongs to her. And also it was possible to judge by her reactions that she is connected with the management of the company and with high-ranking officials. He wanted to know with whom exactly. The guy answered her that yes, he saw everything and he understood her, and he also told her that he was ready to say goodbye to her. Having moved her aside, he left this office building, and the girl remained standing, not understanding how this happened. Then, unexpectedly for everyone, she screamed so that he would hear her. She wanted him to stop and started asking him if he shouldn't be at school at this time, and if so, then that means he's skipping school. The guy stopped, looked at her and calmly answered her that he doesn't go to school. The girl was very surprised. Woo Jin told her again that he doesn't go to school, and if she doesn't have any more questions then he will go, but she still asked him to wait a minute. The guy didn't understand why she kept stopping him because he didn't like wasting time, as this time he didn't see any benefit from talking to her. Of course he thought about the fact that he needed to get rid of her as quickly as possible because she was boring him when you communicate so disrespectfully with people you don't feel the need to prove your importance. He looked at her and understood that now she had to show who she believed in the most. She looked at the guy with disdain, thinking that she was so great and she could do everything in this building. The girl took a pose, putting her hand on her waist. She said that if she was the daughter of the executive director, at that moment he turned his head, looked at her, and decided that everything happened as he thought. At such moments, you need to pretend to be emotional. You also need to open your eyes a little wider and part your lips. That will be enough. He asked her if it was true. The girl at that moment was pleased that she had introduced herself like that and said that now she probably looked different in his eyes. She hurried to stand in such a way as to block his passage. It was necessary to dominate the guy. She didn't take her eyes off him, and it seemed like she was completely satisfied with how she introduced herself. Woojin stopped and stood in the hall. He was not going to move. He was watching her. The girl began to evaluate him from below. She needed to understand whether he was suitable for her company. Woojin continued to stand silently. Only behind the cookie he watched what would happen next. She was pleased because after she revealed her identity, she shamelessly began to look at him as if he was shorter than her. And most importantly, she quickly gained control over her emotions. Suddenly she asked again, "Does he really not go to school?" The guy answered yes. Then the girl said that it was great. She was very bored and suggested that they go somewhere. He looked at her and noticed that her pupils, expressing joy, were raised to the right. The corners of her eyes were slightly lowered, and her lips were curved in a semblance of mockery. She saw him as an ordinary toy in her hands. It was her greed. But on the other hand, he could use her greedily to control her like a puppet. The girl said that she hadn't eaten yet and he could join her. The guy thought that she wasn't giving him a choice, but he agreed. Also look at her from the outside. He thought that there is a high probability that she is a narcissist by nature. The girl said that she knew a great place where they would go to have lunch. The guy asked again where it was. But she didn't even give simple details on the spot because she believed that the whole world should revolve around her. In just a few minutes, they were sitting in a restaurant, and the table was right in the center. The girl asked the guy if he doesn't go to school, it means he's studying to be an idol. The guy answered her that it was not like that at all. Then she asked again what he was doing then. Woojin told her that he was studying and preparing for the exam and asked her why she didn't go to school. Suddenly, the girl said that she graduated very early because of that day. At that moment, her eyes rose to the left. Most likely, she scolded and also began to sympathize hair back. The guy asked again what it meant because of that day, but he didn't hear anything in response. She didn't want to talk about it. He suddenly asked what she meant by her uterine lining due to hormonal changes. The girl was very surprised. Her eyes widened. She didn't understand what he was talking about. At that moment, a waitress came to their table and asked if they wanted to order. The girl immediately said that they needed to bring 2 dishes of Class C. The waitress wrote down their order. The guy watched everything that was happening and understood that, as he thought, she did not give him a choice, and she had a strong desire to dominate everyone. Suddenly, the girl asked what her companion's name was. The guy replied that his name was Woojin, or his full name was Shin Woojin. When she heard his name, she said that it was not a bad name at all, and her name was Lee Yerim. The girl took the phone into her hands and began to examine something in it, so they sat there for some time. She didn't know what else to talk about, so she continued to sit and look at her phone. After which, Lee Yerim couldn't stand it and asked the guy if he always spoke so little. He replied that yes. At that moment, the waitress came up and said that she was ready to put the soup first, holding out her hand to put the plate next to the girl, but she hid her hand. She was bored. Lee Yerim screamed, "Oh my God," she was worried that the soup might spill right on her, but the waitress asked her for forgiveness. The waitress also said that she was very sorry and that the girl was a little upset, after which she put a bowl of soup on the table in front of her. Lee Yerim gave the waitress an ambiguous answer that it would do, although the waitress repeated several times that she was truly sorry. At that moment, the guy noticed that the girl who was serving their table was very sensitive, and in fact, nothing even happened. Lee Yerim wanted to change the topic, so she started fixing her hair and talking about what she said about that day. At that moment, the guy thought that the conversation was again about that day, and there was a high probability that she had made it all up. At that moment, the hair tie jumped out of her hand and fell to the floor and then rolled away. The girl reached for the elastic band to get it, saying that today was clearly her unlucky day. At that moment, the guy got up from his chair, extended his hand and covered the corner of the table. The girl was surprised. She asked him what he was doing and why he extended his hand. The guy replied that he did it so that she wouldn't hit her head. At that moment, she raised her eyes and looked at him, and it was clear that she was very surprised. Woojin then told her that she must have had a pretty tough day if she was talking about it. Lee Yerim told him that not at all. She asked why the guy was pretending to know everything. Then he said that her face looked a little tired. The girl noted that he should look at himself because his face was so pale as if he were a ghost, And in fact, he'd better try the soup before it got cold. Woojin did not contradict her. He silently took a spoon and tried the soup that was brought to them. The soup was very tasty, and you could tell by the guy's expression. The girl said that she did not deceive and this soup is delicious. At least the soup in this place can compete with restaurants in Busan. The guy realized that the fish had carried out its bait if he now begins to retreat. Repeat the words of the interlocutor in order to establish mutual understanding. He did so. Ask her who she went to the restaurant with. The girl answered that she went with an older friend. He should know Kim Yenu. The guy said that they had never heard of it. The girl was simply outraged. Does he really not know the actress Kim Yena, and does he really not watch movies or YouTube? The guy replied that he had never heard of her. What he did was regression therapy, awakening memories with questions to evoke good emotions. The next moment he said that it must be nice to see the ocean. The girl agreed with him about the fireworks exploding over the Gwangandaga Bridge. At this moment, her brain and body were transported from the past and were flooded with dopamine and norepinephrine. When she was talking about all this, she thought that at that moment she felt like she was in the movie she was talking about. In fact, the human brain cannot distinguish between reality and imagination. When someone thinks of lemon, their mouth fills with saliva. And she was in the same state at the moment, although she was sitting in a restaurant. But she spoke as if she was watching fireworks while sitting on a yacht. Only by channeling her memories and listening did he become the source of her joy. It seemed that even the farmers were heart-shaped. The girl kept saying that it was amazing, and she swore it to him. He asked her what it all looked like and whether there really were heart-shaped fireworks there. The waitress brought their main course that they ordered and placed it on their table. The next moment they began to eat their main dish that was brought to them very quickly, and they did not say anything at that moment. After some silence, the girl asked if he had traveled anywhere. The guy replied that he had not and never had. Immediately after the main course, they were brought the last dish. It was mango sorbet. The girl said that then he definitely should do it. Last year she went to Holbrook's Island. The guy asked this in Mexico in the state of Kent on the Yucatan Peninsula. The girl again plunged into her memories. She talked about how the beach was amazing, and at night the sky was all in stars, almost like aurora, and the sparkling waves. Lowering her eyes, the girl was a little surprised as her companion suddenly stood up from his chair. Woojin said that he needs to go because he needs to study. The girl asked again if he is really going to study. This is very unexpected. She asked him to wait and asked if he was doing something dark. The guy answered her that he was studying to get a certificate, and the next moment he told her that he was saying goodbye to her. The girl asked him to wait a minute. She didn't understand whether he could just leave like that. At least he should have given her his phone number. She asked again if he hadn't been to Holbrook's Island, and if the information she would provide him wouldn't be useful to him, since she knew all the hotels and the best restaurants. She tried to convince him that she would tell him everything and that he wouldn't end up in some dive bar. At that moment, the guy thought that the girl was completely dependent on the hormone that brings joy, and he was one of those who could cause them. She could clearly have problems with attachment and a strong lack of family ties. The guy thought if he used it properly, everything she knew could be his, so he handed her his phone. When the girl took it in her hands, she was surprised because the phone even had a password set. The guy thanked her for the food again and took his phone back, and that's when they said goodbye. She stayed to watch him leave the restaurant. She was unhappy that he was leaving her. So she decided that she had to catch up with him and continue their conversation and also continue their communication. The girl followed him out of the restaurant and shouted at the guy to wait, asking him if he wouldn't go with her. She came closer to him and asked him again where he was going, but the guy stood with his back to her and didn't hear her at all. Then she came even closer and turned to him again, but he continued to stand with his back to her and look at the opposite side. He was all in his observations. He saw that on the other side a man in black was hitting another man. When the girl came closer to him and stood right behind him, she asked what was wrong with him. The guy suddenly raised his hand right in front of her face and in a commanding tone told her not to look. After which he briefly said that someone had been stabbed. The girl asked him again what he had said and whether there had really been a knife there. The killer in black saw without turning his head that he had been noticed, and therefore he needed to get away as quickly as possible. The killer left his victim sitting on the ground and began to run away with all his might. At that moment, the guy saw how the killer was running away very quickly. A little more, and it would be unbearable to catch up with him. The guy with the knife ran so fast down the narrow street that after a few seconds, it was impossible to catch up with him. Woojin at that moment rushed in that direction. He dialed the rescue phone and thought, is this really how to live a normal life? He ran closer and saw a man who was covered in blood, and this man could not move. The guy, without losing his head, pressed on the wound with one hand, trying to stop the bleeding. The guy told the victim to just be patient a little longer, at which point he called the emergency services. He said on the phone that someone had been stabbed and that the police should be sent as well. He also said that the location was opposite the restaurant. The guy put two of his fingers to feel the victim's pulse. This was necessary to understand his condition. He heard that the victim's pulse was increasing very quickly, which indicated that the cerebellum was working to increase the heart rate due to blood loss. The guy turned his head and looked at the victim and asked him what his blood type was. And in a conversation on the phone, he said that there was severe internal bleeding. The guy was talking about the shark, Naya abdominal wound, and the victim has hemoperitoneum internal abdominal bleeding, so an urgent blood transfusion is needed. They asked him to repeat it over the phone, and the guy shouted that the victim had lost a lot of blood from the knife attack, and he thinks he will need a blood transfusion during transportation. The victim's blood type is B. Once again, we tried to clarify by phone where exactly the early guy answered that it was the stomach. Then they told him to put the victim on the ground. And then he came to the wound from which blood was flowing with clothes. The guy answered that he does it like that. But the rescuers who arrive must prepare blood in Group B and leave immediately. At that moment, when he was pressing on the victim's wound, he was thinking about only one thing. Is this really how to live a normal life? He heard the voice of his new friend. She came up to him from behind and called him. The guy turned his head and looked at her. Lee Yerim was in shock, trying to cover her mouth with her hands and tears in her eyes. The guy continued to talk on the phone. He looked at the girl and thought that living a normal life is very difficult. Within a few minutes, an ambulance with a flashing light on its roof was parked near this place. In addition to the ambulance that arrived and loaded the victim onto a gurney, a police car also arrived. When it was all over, the guy grabbed a napkin and started wiping the blood off his hands. One of the police officers approached the guy and said that he needed to ask a few questions. He was interested in the man he saw. The guy said that the suspect had short hair and a gray cap. He wore a black t-shirt with a collar, and he was in jeans and weighed about 80 kilograms and was 180 centimeters tall. The police officer asked the guy to repeat everything again from the beginning and pressed the recorder on his phone. When Vujin repeated it again to the police representative, he thanked him very much and asked for contact information. Lee Yerim stood on the opposite side, but she never left. The guy thought that it must be the first time she experienced something like this. After all, she also saw the attacker with a knife and saw how he was striking at her. At that moment, she covered her face in horror. The guy thought that her current state would be very useful for him, and turning around, he went towards her because it was such a first experience. In this situation, everything was like in childhood, like a child standing on his feet for the first time and trying to stay on them. And the parents stand frozen trying to support their child, saying that he is doing everything right. Well done. But sometimes the child cannot stay on his feet and begins to fall. And in this case, faced with a shocking situation, you do not know what to do next. Well, in childhood there are always parents who pick up and tell the child not to cry, and he can still cope with this task. The guy thought that he could calm her down just like his parents did in childhood, because at that moment no one could take his place. The guy came up to her and asked her. She was very scared, but at the moment everything is fine. This moment left a strong impression and made her think about him constantly. The girl was a little confused and then replied that yes, the guy noticed that the victim was not seriously injured and she did not need to worry at all. It was also as if her mother had hugged her as a child and pressed her very hard to her chest. The guy said that the criminal did not see their faces and he would soon be caught. There were many surveillance cameras in the area. After some time, Lee Yerim got to her home and it was evening outside. She had a huge bedroom with stained glass windows and her bed stood in the middle of the room. From her bedroom there was an exit to the bathroom. She stood under the shower washing off all the dirt. The drops of water that fell from the shower at that moment reminded her of the rain that washed away all the troubles. This day was very difficult for her, so she stood under the shower for a long time. The girl closed her eyes trying to comprehend what had happened to him that day. After all, she saw it from the very beginning and saw how her new friend rushed to help and reacted instantly. And she was also very surprised that he told her not to look. And he also said that the victim was not seriously injured and she should not worry. These words of her new acquaintance said only one thing, that he most likely cares about her. Standing under the shower, she once again recalled in her head all the events of that day. After she took a shower, she opened the room and steam from the shower started escaping throughout the bathroom. After which the girl changed into home clothes and tied towels on her head. She headed to the dressing room where she had a huge mirror and she could tidy herself up. She sat down on a small chair that stood near the mirror and looked at herself. All this time she was thinking about only one thing. Should she continue communicating with her new acquaintance? She kept looking at her phone and thinking that she needed to call him because she had never had to ask anyone's permission before. At the same time, in another part of the city where the Woojin family lived, the light was no longer on in his room. All that was visible was the slight glow that his phone was emitting. The guy was lying in his bed looking at his phone and thinking that he needed to try adding a pinch of sodium gluconate because it's the spice of the gods. He was lying and watching one of the videos on YouTube. They were saying that it was really amazing and it was just crazy. The guy watched this video carefully from the beginning to the end and he really liked how this dish looked. And at that moment he told himself that he would definitely try it someday because he really wanted it. At that moment, he received a message from Lee Yerim, a girl asking if he got home okay. This message distracted him a little from browsing the culinary blogs. He thought for a few seconds about what to answer her, after which the girl repeated her question once again. How did he get home and is everything okay with him? The guy quickly came up with an answer for her and sent her a message so that she wouldn't worry. He said that he was perfectly fine and needed to go to bed and wished her good night, after which he continued browsing another culinary blog where they cooked marbled beef. The girl couldn't calm down. She sent him another message that it was 10 o'clock and it was too early to go to bed. Woojin decided that he would ignore her message and explore food in Seoul that evening. The next morning, it seemed to him that this day would be better than the previous one. The guy and his family were sitting at the table just like on previous days. They always had breakfast together. His sister looked at him eating very quickly and told him that he eats a lot. Immediately after the family had breakfast, each member of the family began to go about their business. His father and sister were the first to leave. At that moment, the guy decided that he needed to go to his room and answer a few more tests. He took the textbook with tests and very quickly put check marks where necessary. It seemed that he had done everything. When he wanted to move on to the next tests, at that moment he noticed that his phone was lying next to him. He had already read that there is a golden rule to always keep your phone close to you. After all, this was one of the obligatory habits of everyday life. He needed to get used to it. Unexpectedly for him, his new girlfriend wrote to him. She had already contacted him several times to ask him to read her messages. The guy thought that ignoring messages was part of his everyday life, and he continued answering tests. At some point he stopped because a bird sitting outside the window started chirping very loudly. He turned his head and looked at this bird. It seemed to him that she was very happy with her ordinary life. He thought that it was an ordinary day, and that this day was quite quiet, and there were no adventures in it. The guy tried to convince himself that living a normal life is very difficult, and he needs to work hard at it. The phone that was lying next to him on the table rang. It was an unknown number to him. The guy picked up the phone and said hello. They greeted him and introduced themselves as Manager Kim It-young from the group XX. And this person says that he is calling about a business loan or an emergency loan. The guy was a little surprised. He wondered if he had just won something or if they would tell him something like that. He knew if they called with a phishing scam or a call from scammers with a loan, you need to accept it like this. He told them exactly that he needed about 100 billion won. At that moment, you need to keep a serious face. The person who called was stunned that they were talking to him like that and tried to ask again how much the client needed. After which the same caller hung up. The guy thought that it was very good that he learned how to communicate with scammers. As soon as one call ended, the same phone started ringing again. He thought it was another scam. But he was told that it was from the police station and detectives wanted to talk to him. The man who called asked his name again and asked if it was he who reported the stabbing. The guy replied that it was him. Then the policeman asked him again what condition he was in. The guy replied that he was fine. The detective said that they would like him to come to quickly confirm the suspect. Woojin came out of his room into the living room. There was no one in it. He was alone in the house. He decided not to change clothes so that he could go to the police station very quickly and then return home. After which he decided to leave the house. For this he opened the front door and began to go out into the corridor. After which he began to close the door of his apartment, but there was still a small gap. The guy suddenly opened the door again and looked at the apartment where he had been living lately. At that moment, there was no one in the apartment and it was dark, but he wanted to remember everything as it was. After which he told you that he would be back soon. This time he would not be there for as long as last time. At that moment he had memories of the last time he left home and ended up in slavery. After all, he had already decided for himself that he would come every day without being late, since his parents and his sister were waiting for him in this house. After leaving the house, he headed to the police station, which was located in another part of the city. Arriving at this police station, he noticed that the weather was starting to deteriorate sharply, and the sky was covered with black flying. When he entered the police station, he noticed that there was not a single person in the long corridor. He walked into the office and saw the suspect sitting opposite the detective, his face tense. The guy was watching the suspect through the glass, and the detective asked him if this man looked like the killer. I asked the guy if he also wanted to listen to the interrogation or hear the voice of the suspect. The suspect denied everything. He did not understand why he was arrested and what he was accused of. He thought that the police were now just walking around the neighborhood and picking up random people. He swore that it wasn't him. Woo Jin looked closely at his facial expressions and all his gestures. He began to analyze him. This man was very tense, so it was easy to tell that something was really wrong with him. He also covered his face and mouth several times when he was talking about something. The guy understood that he had never met this man in his life, but his movement said otherwise. When the guy saw how he was holding his hand, he immediately realized that this man was lying. After all, this suspect was a terrible liar, and it was obvious. This is sufficient evidence that he was involved in something. The detective watched the guy carefully as he looked at the suspect and waited for him to answer. The detective asked Woo Jin what he thought after listening to the suspect's answers. He replied that this person is definitely lying, and he is hiding a lot. The detective wanted to ask the guy if this man looked like a criminal. The guy answered that he did. But this man continued to insist that he was just walking not far from this place. The guy noticed that the criminal continued to touch his nose as he did, which meant he was lying. When a person cheats, catecholamines are released, increasing the pressure around the nose and eyes, which is why they itch. Also, a person begins to bite his lips and often touch his face. These are subconscious actions of a person who wants to give up his lies. In fact, when a person is in danger, he has three choices: freeze, run, or fight. The guy noticed that the suspect crossed his legs at that moment. He chose the first option. He froze. Woo Jin understood that even if this was a person and not a criminal, stress would make him freeze. Now all the pieces of the puzzle need to come together, and we need to look at his behavior statistically. In fact, this man's body language indicated that he was afraid that he would actually be found out. The guy asked the detective what education the suspect had. The detective asked him again why he was asking and then replied that he had a master's degree. In fact, the more educated someone is, the more they value logical evidence. If they are guilty, they will worry about DNA and evidence or witnesses. The guy asked the detective again what kind of person he was before he mentioned witnesses. The detective said that there were none yet, and only he saw him from afar. Then the guy suggested that they say that there really is a witness, and in that case he can confess. Woo Jin came to a conclusion that the man who was sitting behind the glass was definitely guilty. He asked the detective if he could leave. The detective told him that he was free and asked again if he really thought that this guy was definitely guilty. Woo Jin answered him yes. Then the detective asked the guy if he wanted him to take him out, to which he replied that he could handle it himself. The suspect continued to say that the police had no proof and no one had seen his face. They allegedly had no witnesses. After listening to all the arguments, the suspect detective decided to enter the interrogation room and do as Woo Jin told him. The detective walked into the room and said from the doorway that Mr. Kim Yang-bai was the witness, and he saw the suspect at the crime scene. The suspect was very surprised, not understanding how he could allow such a thing that a witness exists. The suspect raised his hands and grabbed his head. It was the most terrible moment in his life. He had no choice but to tell everyone that it was spontaneous, and at first he did not plan to kill him. When Woo Jin went outside, the rain stopped, but puddles still remained on the asphalt. The heavy dark clouds were gone, and small white clouds appeared in the sky, which quickly carried us somewhere far away. Woo Jin stood looking at the sky, and he really liked the fact that the bad weather was over and a sunny day had arrived. The guy turned and looked at the window of the police station. As always, he was most interested in food. He saw some employees going to lunch, and at that moment they were eating jajangmyeon. He wanted to know how it tasted. He couldn't even control his emotions. He started drooling. He thought that he should definitely try it one day. After which the guy realized that it was time for him to leave the police station. He took out his phone and looked at what they had written to him. His new girlfriend Yurim sent him 3 messages in which she wanted to know where he had disappeared to. The guy from that, there is no need to test her patience anymore, and it is better for him to answer anyway. That's why he immediately wrote to her that he had caught a seizure and she could already relax. The girl opened his message and read it. She was even more surprised by his behavior. At that moment, Yurim was at school. One of her friends asked where she cuts her hair. It looks amazing. Another asked if she exchanged it for a bag and how much it cost. Well, the girl seemed not to have heard any of her friends. She wrote to him asking if this was true. And then she wrote a few more messages, and she was interested in when he was caught and why he was only writing about it now. Woo Jin responded to her in messages that he was busy ignoring her message. The girl was shocked because it was incredible. She thought and therefore wrote to him that it was not normal to ignore her messages. She grabbed her head and thought that she had no words at all because no one had ever spoken to her like that before. Yurim wrote to him that she was almost done and asked him what he was going to do now. He said that he wanted to take part in the challenge, and if she came, they could do it together. After some time, they met in one of the restaurants where this challenge was supposed to take place. The girl asked if he really should do this, to which she heard the answer that life is a series of trials, and if there is an opportunity, you need to use it. I'll breathe. The waiter, who was holding a stopwatch in his hands, said that they had to eat everything in 20 minutes, and if they couldn't eat it or they threw up, then they would lose. Woo Jin looked at his portion and thought that there are no portion limits. It continues to grow all this time. He knew very clearly how everything happens inside the body and the main factor of the hormone leptin. Leptin is released by fat cells during meals, sending signals of fullness to the brain. He knew he had to finish before leptin told his brain he was full. The waiter holding a stopwatch asked them to tell him when they were ready. Woo Jin immediately said that he was ready. Then the waiter said that they were starting. Woo Jin grabbed as much of the chopsticks he was holding in his hand from his plate as he could. After that, he put pasta on a stick on his chest and in an instant began to stuff it into his mouth. Everything happened so fast that it seemed more like some kind of show than a challenge. After he ate all the pasta on his plate, he started on the pieces of meat. Yurim was shocked when she saw him eating and said, "Is he really going to eat all this in whole pieces?" But the guy kept grabbing as much pasta as he could and then shoving it into his mouth. He had very little left. This was the gravy that was in his bowl. He needed to drink it as quickly as possible. He decided that he needed to stand up and drink while standing so that everything would fit in his stomach. After which the guy collapsed back onto his chair and was already sitting with an empty plate in his hands. After which he put the plate very loudly on the table so that everyone could see that he had eaten everything. Then he reached out his hand and pressed the stopwatch. It was clear that he had won this argument. The waiter was very surprised because he didn't expect the guy to cope, so he asked if this guy was going to become a YouTuber or something like that. Yurim sat motionless watching him after he finished. She asked how he was able to eat all that. Woo Jin told her that everything was fine. The girl did not understand how it all happened, and the end of which she saw, it was also abnormal. When they came out, the guy thanked the owner of this restaurant, saying that it was an amazing place and thanked him for the food. The girl asked her new friend if he had room for a latte. Woo Jin told her that dessert is a must after a meal when he is with a girl. Yurim looked at him and said he should understand that he is very strange and behaves very strangely, but for some reason she finds it funny. The guy just wanted to know if it was abnormal that he was so strange. She told him to hurry up. When they entered the cafe, Woo Jin took one sip of latte and said that it was very sweet. Yurim looked at him and added that he needed to stop watching YouTube. The guy continued eating the dessert and said that it was incredibly delicious, but she wasn't interested at all because he wasn't paying attention to her. When they went outside, a car with a personal driver was waiting for the girl, who was supposed to take her home. Yurim told her friend that she could give him a ride home, and he should jump in the car. Woo Jin replied that he wanted to walk to digest. Yurim, getting into her car, said goodbye to him and said that they would see each other again. The guy remained standing on the sidewalk, watching her get into the car. The girl, sitting in the car, watched her new acquaintance and thought that he was very strange. But she also thought that he was very unusual, and she had never had such friends in her life. Time passed very quickly, and when he returned home, it was already evening. Woo Jin was sitting in his room as usual and watching YouTube, where they were talking about how they were going to grill on medium heat for 5 minutes. At that moment, the phone rang. He was surprised that someone was calling him at such a time. He wondered if these were the same people again, and they would start telling him that he had won something. The guy answered this call, but these people asked, "This is Shin Woo Jin's phone." The guy said yes. He asked again who was calling him. He didn't understand why they were calling him again. Well, the man introduced himself, and it was Detective Hyun Tae-hyung. He asked if he could talk here now. The detective said that the conversation would be about what he had already told him about the YouTube channel and its host from high school. The detective began to tell that the guy was right. And as he said, the victim was 20 years old and there was a whole group of attackers. These attackers all met in a gang of runaways. The victim ran away from home so often that her family rarely looked for her. It was clear that the victim, who often ran away, had now reached 20 years of age. Although she was locked up and appeared on YouTube, no one had any suspicions or questions. The gang of escapees knew this, and they committed crimes. The detective said that the guy did not save someone's life. He wanted to know how he figured it out. Woo Jin replied that he had no special abilities. He asked if the victim had returned home. The detective replied that yes. And he also added that thanks to the guy's abilities, they solved a whole case and he wants to buy him lunch and asked when he was free. At that moment, he thought that he had an opportunity, and he could act strictly according to the plan that was in his head, so he said that they could just meet. The detective asked again what he wanted to eat. He just had to say. Then the guy replied that he wanted the highest grade Hanwoo number 9. That was his wish. The detective asked him again, did he mean Teokboki Bulgogi? To which he heard the answer no. The guy repeated once again that he wanted Hanwoo A++ number 9. That's the only thing he wanted to try. The detective then replied that if he really says that he wants this, then it will be so, because he has done something impressive and this dish is not a problem. The detective asked again when they would meet, and the guy answered him, how about this Saturday? They agreed that each of them would not take up that day. Woojin had been waiting for Saturday all week, so when it came, he headed to meet the detective. He walked and thought only about one thing, that finally the day would come when he would try Hanwha number 9. Suddenly, a girl's voice was heard from behind him. Anapa asked him for forgiveness and attention for 1 minute because she wanted to ask something. Woojin turned around and this girl started saying that she thought he had good luck. The guy never thought about his luck. The girl continued to talk about how that was exactly why she simply couldn't pass by. The guy asked her again what she meant when she said that. Was it about luck, a blessing, or a good fate? The girl replied that they were studying all of this and he had very bright energy. He asked again what exactly they were studying. Then the girl tried to explain that they mainly focus on the basis of the universe. Woojin wondered if this could be a branch of science like physics. The girl replied that no, it can't because there is a proverb, a mountain is a mountain and water is water. She believed that people do not see nature as it is. They assign meanings to it. After all, in fact, mountains are a term denoting a highland region densely overgrown with trees. Water chemical formula ash 2O, a compound of hydrogen and oxygen. The guy wondered if there was a mistake in his knowledge. The girl said that she thought so, that his energy was so bright and he had his own enlightenment. After that, she asked if he was often told that he was cute. The guy who was with this girl said that right at that moment he could see an ancestor sitting on his shoulder, and he looked very much like him. Woojin started looking around and the guy kept saying that the worst ancestor was watching him all the time. Woojin asked these people if they could see ghosts. He was very surprised by what they said. The girl tried to calm him down. She said that they don't call them ghosts, they call them ancestral spirits. Woojin then asked them if there are spirits of ancestors. They are not biological organisms. How do they perceive them? Because normally the human eye passes information through the macula, the blind spot and the optic nerve before the eye receives it. He wondered if they really had visual organs different from other people. Woojin looked at these people and wondered if they were somehow different and if evolution and genetic mutation had occurred recently. He wanted to know if they could perceive energy waves that other people couldn't see. The guy whispered to the girls that they better do it another time. Something urgent had happened. The girl said the same words, that they need to meet another time and then they will explain everything. Something urgent happened. She looked at the guy and said that they really needed to go, but there was fear in her eyes. She was no longer as confident as she had been when she approached him and started talking to him. Woojin didn't understand why they were leaving. At the last moment, he asked if he was really such a scary person. The two started saying that it wasn't that simple. Something unexpected happened, and they would meet another time. In fact, he was very curious and he wanted them to stay and tell him more about the spirits of the ancestors, but they quickly began to run away. Woojin remained standing in place. He wanted to talk to them because he was not scary at all. Behind the guy stood a man who was filming everything that was happening on his phone. After the two ran away, he laughed loudly and said that it was just great, and he finished his recording. After which, the man approached Woojin and said that he was from the YouTube channel Kirit TV. This man explained that many people fall for scammers and he just records evidence just in case, but he has never seen anyone deal with them so quickly. After which, this person asked the guy for permission to post this video on his YouTube channel. Woojin lowered his eyes and said that it would not be normal, and there was no need to do this. The man promised that he would cover his face. Woojin was unequivocal and asked the man to remove the video. He did not agree. The blogger tried to explain that for the public good, such videos should be distributed. The blogger tried to stop him and say that they were ready to change his voice and no one would recognize him. Woojin turned around and started to leave. Then the blogger offered him 500,000 won. The guy said that they would delete it anyway. The blogger didn't stop you and his next offer was 1 million won and it would immediately go to his account. The guy continued to say delete. Woojin thought for a moment and agreed, showing the account number to which the money was to be transferred. The blogger was a little confused. I don't understand how this guy can move his hands so fast, but the next moment, 1 million won was credited to his account. After some time, he got to the very restaurant where they were going to meet the detective. The detective held the menu in his hands and asked the guy what he wanted to order. Woo Jin replied that he wanted the Hanwoo tenderloin number 9. He looked at the detective and the video that he was a little confused by the prices, so the guy said that something else is possible too. The detective told him that of course they would take the cutting since he had promised to treat him. Then the detective waiter came and said to bring 3 cutlery, after which he raised his head, looked at the guy and thanked him, because if they had been even a little late, a tragedy would have happened. The detective said that when they arrived at the scene it was a complete mess. A child cut out the glass and was about to jump out of the window. Woo Jin thought it was good that it ended this way. At that moment, the waitress came over and brought truffle powder for garnish. The detective suddenly said that he was very busy and forgot to ask him how the guy was doing because he was holding up well. Woo Jin said that he tried to live normally all this time, and he did everything to become normal. But he can easily recognize those people who ask for help. He sees when they are holding him back, just like him. But he can also notice many other things, like how his mother bought the detective clothes or how he played the violin as a hobby. The detective noticed this. You can call it anything but normal. Most likely because of that incident, he has an injury that forces him to study crimes. After 1 second, the waitress brought a huge dish and said that it was their tenderloin that we didn't order. The detective and the guy lowered their heads over this dish because it was several pieces of raw meat. The waitress started frying one of the pieces of meat right before their eyes, and the guy started drooling. The waitress told them to try a piece of meat with salt first. Woo Jin thought that he had finally waited for this moment. He took this piece of meat with chopsticks and brought it to the cat, after which he took a bite. What happened next was some kind of brain explosion. The guy couldn't describe it in words. He only felt that he was hot. The detective didn't understand and asked him what was wrong. Did he really bite his tongue? But then he had to be more careful. After which the detective took a piece of meat into the room with 2 chopsticks and brought it to his mouth. The same thing happened to the detective as to the guy a few seconds ago. It was beyond words. Now it was clear that this was just super meat. It was delicious in the mouth and it was worth every penny they paid. The detective told the guy not to get distracted because he was already eating the remaining piece. Woo Jin said that he was fine. He was also finishing his meal. The guy thanked the waitress for cooking him such delicious meat. As expected, it was incredibly delicious, and the detective also thanked them for preparing such meat. The detective asked the guy if he should order some more. Then he replied that that was to be expected from a detective. He knew the golden rule, and if they didn't have enough meat, they could order more. After they had sat very well and liked everything, they went outside. It was already night. The night passed quickly. The guy was fast asleep, and opening his eyes, he saw the blue sky in his window. On this day, as on other days, before he had the strength to study, he had to pass the certification. His mother cooked the food. He and his sister really loved the way their mother cooked. After which they went together to the room to study, but this time he controlled his sister. After he studied with his sister, he decided to meet his new girlfriend. Everything went according to plan for him. He met with Yurim. They went to cafes and just walked together. They also went to the library, where he took many books that he wanted to read more. And soon the day came when he could attend classes together with everyone else. He went to school for a lesson, and it turned out to be the very norm that he wanted to live in. Time passed quickly, and instead of hot summer, it was deep autumn outside. All the leaves turned yellow. And you could see how these leaves were already falling to the ground. One season of the year was replaced by another. When it got cold outside and snow started falling from the sky, that moment came when teachers wished their students good luck and told them to try to be attentive. Among the seniors was Woo Jin, who, like everyone else, wanted to pass these exams. Approaching the school, he saw an announcement wishing all students success. He was going to the final exam at the 10th District College. When he went inside, he and other students walked down a long corridor to his classroom. Entering the classroom, he decided that his place would be in the very center and began to take off his outerwear. Within a few minutes, all the seats in this auditorium were occupied, and in front of them stood a teacher who was supposed to hand out tests to them. The guy was ready for this test, but for him it was another test. He was all in anticipation. The teacher came up to him and gave him some test sheets that he had to fill out. Taking his pen, he quickly read everything that was required of him. He thought that it was very good. And the next thing he decided for himself was that he needed to immediately start testing. Some time passed, and the students who had finished their tests began to leave the school building. At that moment, Woo Jin thought that he most likely did everything completely wrong. His head was a complete mess, and he thought he had made an irreparable mistake. He looked at the other students who were being met by their parents after they left class. He thought about what his mother always said: as long as he was healthy, that was enough for her. And she also said that he doesn't need to study well. He just needs to live a normal and happy life. He always wanted his parents to be happy for him and think that he did a good job. He walked down the street and thought about only one thing, how he would explain everything that happened at home, and because of this, he was in no mood at all. Approaching the front door, he slowly began to open it. He did not know how he would speak. His sister met him at the door. She was happy to see him and wanted to know all the details. The first question she asked him, he passed the tests that were given to him. The guy stood silently. There was sadness on his face, and it was clear that he was disappointed. His sister did not understand why he looked like that. The only thing that came to her mind was that her brother most likely failed the exam. But with the speed with which he answered questions, this simply couldn't happen. Then Bomi asked her brother how he was feeling and why he was so upset. She wanted to know if something bad had happened. Her brother replied that he was too confident. Then she thought that he had actually failed the test and was nervous. His sister began to calm him down, saying that even if he failed this test, there was always a second chance. No one would blame him. Woojin looked at his sister. Of course, he was glad that she said so, but he said that he would go to the shower. After which he went to his room, opened the door, and went inside. The guy quickly took off all his things and scattered them on the bed. He had no time for order in his room. He also saw a message from Yurim, who was also interested in whether he had passed his test. Woojin decided that he would not answer her. He would ignore her and put his phone on the table. He thought that he had been solving too many meaningless practical books. With the same displeased expression on his face, he walked out into the living room where his younger sister was sitting. He walked around the apartment with his head down. It seemed like he felt guilty. His sister thought that in all the time she had known him, she was seeing him like this for the first time. After all, in fact, she saw him in different ways. Very hungry and not knowing how to open ice cream, and also surprised by the ordinary taste of popcorn. All this time she was next to him, and she thought that she should take care of him. She called her parents. When she called her mom, the first thing she asked was that Woojin's mom was already home and asked what he wanted to eat besides bulgogi. Bomi told her mother that most likely her brother couldn't handle the test as he wanted, and he had a very sad face. The father intervened in the conversation. He wanted to know if his son was already home. The mother continued to say that maybe he felt this way because he couldn't cope with something. The father wanted to talk to his son on the phone and tried to take the phone away. The father asked his daughter if Woojin really failed the test, and she said that judging by his face, he was very disappointed. But the parents thought that it was just a test, and she should tell him that it was normal and that it happens. They would buy some tasty food and would be back soon. The guy came out of the shower at that moment. His sister stopped talking to their parents. Bomi told her brother not to dwell on this because this is not the last grief. She wanted to ask him if he really had so many wrong answers that he was so upset. The guy said that it didn't matter at all. He wanted to know if mom and dad were already returning. He thought he was very wrong. He thinks he coped with all the questions. He should have made at least a couple of them wrong. His sister was very surprised by this answer. Could he really have handled all the questions? Woojin continued to say that he answered all the questions subconsciously, so he gave the right answers. Bomi was even more surprised by such words. She simply had nothing to say. The sister asked her brother what she doesn't understand now. Is it really because of this that he is now in a bad mood? Because in fact it is not normal to feel guilty when he answered absolutely correctly because he solved too many practical books. The guy said that his hands moved reflexively. He couldn't even notice how his joints moved. It seemed like he knew all these answers by heart, and at that moment he was thinking more about food than about the test. The guy said that he did it on a subconscious level, just like everyone else doesn't think about breathing. He looked at his hands and it seemed like he didn't understand what was wrong with them, because in fact, it wasn't normal. His sister was confused. She didn't understand what was wrong with her brother because in fact, he passed the test. Woojin told his sister that he just solved the whole test. The girl was happy and said that it was just wonderful. But the next minute they both started thinking, because she thought it was simply impossible to answer all the questions correctly. So she told him that everything was fine and maybe something was wrong in his answers. She asked again if there were questions that he remembered to check if they could do it. The guy replied that he remembered absolutely all the answers. His sister was even more surprised how she could remember all her answers. Then he tried to explain to her that he had solved them all himself, and he couldn't help but know the answers to them. Bomi turned to him and suggested that if he remembers everything, then they can check them, and he definitely made a mistake somewhere. A few seconds later, they were in the room and went to the site where you could see the answers to this test. Bomi turned to her brother and asked what his answer was to the first question. He sat on the bed, covering his face with his midonyami. He said 4. And this answer was correct. His sister was very surprised but asked again what the answer was in the second. Then the guy said he would just say everything at once. Second, 3/3 1, fourth, 2/5 4. Bomi didn't understand how it was possible to remember this, but all of these answers were correct. The guy kept saying 8th 1 9th 1 10th 12th 2 last 25th 5. Woojin, ask your sister, she listens to him. The girl covered her face. She listened to him. Woojin asked if she had at least one wrong answer, because maybe he could still have mistakes in other subjects. They decided to check all the math, first 4 second 3 third 5. In fact, all the answers were correct, and this made the guy even more nervous. He didn't know what to do. Bomi turned to her brother and looked at him. She knew he had done just fine on this test. The sister told her brother not to be too upset, but he couldn't come to terms with the fact that he had decided everything correctly. The girl settled down on the contrary that it was very good, and it should be noted she was happy for her brother. Woojin couldn't come to terms with this, and he thought that it was abnormal, and he was somehow abnormal. Bomi told her brother that it was super, and their mom and dad would be shocked, and most importantly, they would be very happy for him. Bomi tried to explain to him that it was as if he was living on another level, and that he was a little different and distinct from the others. When Woojin heard her explanation, he said that this was probably not normal, and he wanted to be a normal person. At that moment, their mom and dad returned. Bomi jumped up from her seat and ran to meet them. When the girl ran into the living room, she started screaming that her brother got a perfect result. My father was a little confused because she said that her brother failed the test. She said that it was not about that. When Mom saw Woojin, the first thing she asked him was if it was true, and their father repeated the word perfect result several times. As soon as Danya realized it, it was as if a light bulb went on in his father's head, and he even dropped the bags he was carrying. After which he attacked his son and began to loudly say that he got this talent from him, and it was his genes, and his mother said that it was from her that he got such talent. Bomi asked how she was answered that she too was a genius child. Loud voices were heard in their house. Dad was shouting louder and louder that everyone needed to be gathered. He was treating them tomorrow. He called everyone and said that something good had happened and told them that his son had gotten a perfect score on a test. He also told all his friends that his son was as smart as he was, but their mother objected because she thought he had brains like hers. The father called another friend of his and said that they should see each other tomorrow. The guy was a little upset because he thought that his father was saying that he was crazy. The father looked at his son and said that in his opinion he could choose a fairly prestigious job. And he thinks that it would be best for him to become a doctor, since people in white coats always help others. Or he can become a prosecutor and always be on the side of the law. He should be able to do it. Or maybe he can even become a lawyer and protect other people. Various associations arose in the father's head. He believed that his son could become an expert appraiser, accountant, or tax inspector. At that moment, my mother got hit very hard from behind by my father and told him not to press on the child anymore. In the opinion of the mother, their son should be the one he wants and he will enroll in whatever university he wants to go to. At that moment, the guy said that he wanted to go to a normal university. It was one of his wishes. The whole family froze. They didn't understand what university he wanted to go to and what normal meant. Dad asked his son if he really wanted to go to a normal university. Bomi was also very interested in what he meant. She asked her brother what direction he chose. Woojin answered her that he had not yet decided, but he would make his choice soon. The boy sat in his room and thought about his father's words when he said that it would be good if his son were an expert appraiser or an accountant or a tax inspector. So he decided to become a court secretary, which was one of the professions that was available at the university. He read that a court secretary is a profession that drafts legal documents for courts, prosecutors, and so on. He also read about tax inspectors. This is a department, and work with taxes there requires attentiveness and precision. He thought maybe he should become an architect and manage the design process of buildings and structures. He was also thinking about such a profession as a doctor or a prosecutor, but in fact he had not yet made a choice. When he read about each of these professions, the guy thought that his father suggested template professions. All of these options were related to legislation to one degree or another. He sat at his desk in the room and read about the prosecutor Lee Jong-mi, what institute she graduated from, and he also asked about the doctor, the expert, the lawyers, and many other people. Most of them graduated from University C. He just wanted to know if that's true, then University C is the most normal. A few minutes later, he left his room and went into the living room where his whole family was sitting. Unexpectedly for everyone, he announced that he had already decided and he would enter the university as a normal person. After which he announced that he would go to university. His sister thought at that moment that her brother was completely crazy. Unexpectedly for everyone, Dad declared that this was the right decision, and this university was the most normal one. The family had no choice but to support him and tell him that he needed to choose a faculty at a normal university. Time passed and the 25th arrived, and then the first New Year holidays ended. And when February came, it was the beginning of the academic year at the university. In order to get to the university, he had to get there by train, but this time he went to a completely different place. It was a high-speed belt and it moved very quickly on the rails despite the fact that it was snowing. The guy opened his backpack and looked at what he had in his backpack. He took out the food that his mother had put in for him. It was a boiled egg. He thought that he had always wanted to do this. And he hit his head with the egg with all his might. The shell on the egg cracked. After which he removed the shell from the boiled egg in order to eat it. After biting into the egg, he washed it down with sparkling water. He found the taste extraordinary. It was a very simple meal, but the taste was very unusual. He had never mixed these products before. At that moment, he thought that now he understood why people eat on trains, because it is quite an amazing combination. He was driving and looking out the window, watching the snow fall from the sky. He liked it. After some time, he arrived at the station. The announcer said thank you for using the high-speed train that day and wished him a safe journey. After which the guy bought tickets for the bus, and after a while he went to board. As soon as boarding was completed, this bus began to move along its route. The place he was heading to was not a crowded place at all. There was a prison for prisoners there. Having seen the installation, he headed to the checkpoint to go inside. When he entered, the security guard showed the guy to sign in several places, after which the same guard led him down a long corridor to one of the rooms and showed him where to go. When the guard opened this room, the guy stopped. He needed a minute because there was no one inside and it was dark. When he went inside, he saw that there was no one there yet and that he and the criminal would be separated by glass. During this moment of waiting, he kept his eyes on that very door. It seemed monstrous to him. He was here because of that man who had been calling him a bastard all this time and who wanted to hit him so that he would understand. He told him every time that he couldn't do a single thing and that in fact he was an ordinary idiot. That same door opened and a man who had held him for 12 years was brought into the room on the other side of the glass. The guy looked at him completely differently. Vic, this is the man who stole 12 years from him. The criminal didn't understand why this guy came. Did he really want to see him? Woo Jin sat silently for a while. He no longer looked like that downtrodden child. The criminal noticed that this guy definitely can't hear and therefore he can't understand him, but he can read lips. Then this criminal told the guy again that he was a bastard, smiled and asked how he was doing. This criminal wanted to find out the truth from the guy because he believed that he was the one who killed his entire family. At this point, the guard told the prisoner to calm down, but he continued to scream, calling the guy a bastard, and I think he killed them. At that moment, Woo Jin caught himself thinking that he was no longer afraid of this man and did not feel any emotions. Now he was completely free. He came out of the prison where he was for 12 years, and no one can stop him despite the fact that this criminal tried to do it. Woo Jin tried to explain to him that now everything is according to different rules, and now they have changed roles and now he should be afraid of him. After all, the guy was in this place to confirm this. Despite this, the criminal continued to speak. That it was definitely him because his half-sister, she was not at all interested in medicinal herbs, then it is not clear how she died. The guy answered him that he perfectly remembers every blow that she inflicted on him, leaving scars for life. The guy noticed that the prisoner's uniform suited him very well, and at that moment he smiled. The criminal was very surprised. He couldn't even imagine that this guy could speak, and therefore he could hear his words. The guy replied that his voice was shaking badly, but he wanted to tell him that his family was dying one a year. And they died from heart attacks or poisoning. Prisoners began to beat their hands on the glass, screaming that he was a bastard. Then the guy tried to explain to him that people only see what they want to see and believe what they want to believe. They only want to hear what confirms their thoughts. The guy turned to the prisoner at 20 and said that he had beaten up 2 of his friends, but both of them died of a heart attack. It was clear that goosebumps appeared on his arms and that this prisoner wanted to distance himself from him. He immediately analyzed his condition. It was clear that his pulse was increasing and blood was collecting in his chest. He decided that he should press harder because he is no longer the guy who has blood all over his body and he can do it. Woo Jin, I look right in my eyes. He said that recently he was faced with a choice. He wanted to convey to the conclusion at 20 that he was thinking about whether he should carve the date of his release on his body so as not to forget it. The prisoner slammed his hand on the glass, shouting, "Is he really threatening him?" The guy answered him that he was not going to threaten him. He was only concerned about his health. After which the guy asked the prisoner if he had really started writing his autobiography. He was curious about what he would write there. The prisoners did not understand how the guy could find out about this because he did not tell anyone anything. The guy continued to tell him that it was not good for his health, and it was better to stop eating until you were completely full. Put the spoon down when you felt a slight satisfaction and not overeat. The guy also advised him to exercise moderately and spend as much time in the sun as he can. He should focus on his health. The guy told the prisoners that he even put some money into his prison account. He explained that he is not working yet, so he has little money, but from time to time he will still replenish it. Wu Jin believed that it was part of his plan that the prison funds he put there would always be in his head. The prisoner tried to break the glass with both hands and shouted something very loudly. He swore, after which the prisoner kicked the glass again with all his might, at which point he fell and was attacked. The prisoner sat on the floor and screamed that the guy was a bastard and he was a murderer, that his whole family and neighbors were beaten. It was his doing. He thought that now this man was a prisoner, and he already reminded him of another boring person. The prisoner shouted that one of his henchmen was now watching him. Despite the fact that the prisoner behaved in this way and the guard tried to calm him down, the guy thought that he was still interested in him. He told him at parting that they would see each other again. Immediately after these words, the guy went outside and headed back home. Climbing the steps, he watched the snow fall. Cross yourself, he saw a couple in love, where the guy thought it was very cold outside, and the girl hugging him said that it wasn't very. Wu Jin extended his hand and saw snow. He learned that around the steam, microscopic particles of ice were formed that fell to the ground under the force of gravity. He could not help but think that for a prisoner, depending on his surroundings, this snow could become a joy. Or on the contrary, a source of stress, as he had when he was alone in an unheated barn. The guy understood that this is why the environment plays a big role. Everything in this life depends on who surrounds you. Well, in fact, he didn't think that even such cold weather as that day would be able to bring warmth to people. Wu Jin looked to the side and saw his sister. She was walking with two of her friends. He called her. The girl picked up the phone and asked her brother what he wanted, to which the guy asked where she was going. Bomi answered him that she was home and asked her brother where he was. Wu Jin didn't hide it and told her sister that he was standing right in front of her and he could see her. Bomi raised her head, looked around, asked again where he was opposite, and saw him. Wu Jin was actually standing very close to where she was, and he was watching her. When Bomi saw her brother, she couldn't hold back and rushed to the place in order to run up to him and hug him. She was like a falling snowflake. Bomi ran towards him with a wide smile. At that moment, the sidewalk was slippery, but she didn't even look at her feet. She only looked at him. At that moment, the guy thought that this is why the environment is so important for a person. All he had to do was decide whether he was happy with himself in the environment he had at the moment. And he also had to decide whether he was truly happy, just like his sister, if he was in such an environment. When Bomi ran up to him and hugged him, she also asked where he was coming from. The guy replied that he had gone that day to visit a friend he hadn't seen for a long time. Bomi's girlfriends were very surprised when they saw Bomi's brother in real life, and how cool he looks in real life. Wu Jin told her sister that he visited his friend whom he once knew, but he doesn't need to see him anymore. After which, he took out a wrap box of food from his bag and told his sister to try this takoyaki. Wu Jin added that they were very tasty, and he wrapped them up so that they wouldn't get cold until he treated her. Bomi was a little surprised that he left them for her. She tried them and said that they were really tasty. Time passed very quickly, and the cold weather gave way to sunny days. Spring has come. All nature has begun to wake up. The first leaves and flowers have appeared on the trees. For the young man, this meant only one thing, that the moment was beginning when he would begin to lecture at the university. It was his first day. He took public transport, and then he had to walk a little further to get to the university. He went to the notice board and started reading the schedule. He needed to understand where his first lecture would be. In addition to the schedule, there were several other notices on the bulletin board that he read. At that moment, the only thing he thought about was what was the purpose of this event, and of course there would be no free lunch. After he found out in which room he would have a lecture, he headed to that building. He didn't want to be late. When he entered the auditorium, he saw what the lecture hall looked like. There were no students in it yet. That's why the guy thought that the most normal thing would be to sit in the center so that he could hear well. At that moment, one of the guys greeted him. This guy knew Wu Jin by name, and when he approached him, he introduced himself, saying that his name was Park Jong-kook, and he was very happy to meet him. Indeed, in the freshman group of the University of Business Administration, there was a freshman named Park Jong-kook in the chat room. Wu Jin replied that he was glad to meet him, smiled, and said that they should not fight and stick together. His new acquaintances thought that it sounded like a textbook. And also Park Jong-kook asked him if she knew the distribution after classes, to which the guy replied that yes. Then his new acquaintance looked around and saw that Songi had appeared in the audience. He approached her to talk to her. With each passing minute, there were more and more people in the audience. Some of them were talking about the place, some about the lesson. Woojin sat in his seat waiting for his first lecture at the university to begin. He always wanted to attend it. A few minutes later, a teacher entered the classroom, approached the lectern, and greeted the students. The teacher looked at his new students and told them that he was very glad that they entered this university. He also introduced himself as a professor of business administration who would be giving a lecture at their place. In these lectures, he said that he was leading into business and asked his students what they thought it was. He waited for someone to raise their hand and answer. But since it was the first lecture, the students behaved very modestly, and no one raised their hand. Woojin thought that if he raised his hand, it would be abnormal. Then the professor saw a guy in a blue sweater and asked him what he thought about this issue. The guy scratched his head and said that most likely these lectures will be about company management. The professor also wanted to clarify with another student who was wearing a white sweater. This guy replied that he thought it was management and work. The professor said that both the first and second answers were almost correct, but he also wanted to know what a business leader should be like and asked a student in the back row about it. I heard the answer that a business leader should be good at making plans and giving directions. The professor liked the answer and asked his neighbor on the right. In this place sat Woojin. He thought that he was called because he was sitting in the center, and if he was asked, of course he had to answer. Then the guy said that he thinks a leader should be able to convince. At that moment, the professor wondered if this guy was thinking correctly. The professor asked him again what he meant by the word convince. Woojin answered him that it is the leader who must convince. And as an example, he cited the very advertisement that he saw on the bulletin board today. This could be a suitable example. He saw that a securities firm was holding a stock trading competition. The guy was thinking and said that people most likely think that the prize is money, so they want to take part, but everything is a little different. Most likely, it could be an ordinary bait and invented by the company and resemble an ordinary mousetrap. This method of identifying people who can manage stocks at an entry level, and if someone takes first or second place, the company will reward him in order to lure the company away in the future. The guy continued to talk about how this company would maintain contact with the winners through scholarships and similar incentives. The professor listened attentively. Well, all the other students in the audience also listened to him, and the guy continued to say that when you watch an advertisement, the human brain is hypnotized, and business leaders know how to use this. When a person watches any advertisement where something needs to be sold, the thought immediately appears in his head that the person wants to buy it and wants to have it. If some entertainment or something is shown, a person immediately has an association that he wants to go to this place and buy this thing. The guy said that they make people want to give something to someone or make them thirst for something. The students didn't understand what was wrong with this guy. Woojin continued to say that all these actions are called marketing, but if you look at it more broadly, he noticed that everyone was paying attention to him. His main argument was that this is a huge civilizational society built on persuasion. When he finished his answer, there was a moment of silence in the audience. No one said anything, but only thought. The guy raised his hand and turned to the professor. He wanted to clarify when the lecture itself would start, because he really wanted to go to regular classes. After this question, some students thought that this guy had already told them everything, while others thought about it and decided that this is precisely why they don't buy unnecessary things. The professor looked at the boy and told him that this was a decent answer and added that this student had the highest passing score. All the students sitting in that auditorium turned around, looked at him, and started applauding him. Woojin thought at that moment that being normal was harder than he thought. He needed to put in as much effort as possible, although this was definitely a normal answer. The professor walked up to the board and told the students that it was now time to begin their first class, and the topic would be Introduction to Business Management. The guy thought that the long-awaited first lecture had finally arrived, and he would be able to remember everything carefully. The professor said that business management is learning how to effectively manage an organization. The guy caught every word the professor said and understood that what he was saying was really accurate. The professor continued to talk about how business consists of planning, organizing, managing, and controlling. These four processes make up its management. The professor went on to say that the first planning is setting goals and creating a path to achieve them. At that moment, the young man thought about everything the professor said. He already knows all of it. The next thing the professor started talking about was motivating people, managing them, and achieving goals through teamwork. He then spoke about checking the plan for making the necessary adjustments. Everything that the professor was talking about, the young man thought, he had already seen all of this, and he had already read about all of this. The guy was listening very attentively to every word the professor said. He didn't want to miss anything. Even the girl sitting next to him noticed it. The guy wondered if the professor noticed that he was listening to him attentively, as the other students were not really able to relax. The time appeared on the board. It was the end of the lecture. The professor announced that the lecture was over for today. And also, as he was leaving, the professor said that they all had a nice lunch and that they would see each other next time. Since it was lunchtime, the guy thought that he would finally be able to try the famous food from the canteen. The students were leaving the classroom. Some of them were saying goodbye to others, saying that they would see each other again. Others were simply wishing them a pleasant appetite. But many students went to the canteen where they could buy lunch. When Woo Jin came in, he was surprised how cool it was there, and he really liked the fact that it was self-service. He, like all the other students, went to the self-service board and chose the dishes he wanted to try, after which he sat down at a table with the tray where there was no one. The other students were a little surprised. They sat at other tables and watched him eat. In just a few seconds, there was nothing left on his plates. He successfully ate all the dishes he took, and most importantly, very quickly. The guy continued to sit at the table. He thought that he lacked sodium glutamate. It is as harmful as salt. His thoughts were interrupted by a message that came to him. It was from one of his acquaintances, or more precisely, from a detective. The detective wanted to ask the guy how he was doing with his free time, to which the guy replied that he had just finished lunch and was a little busy. But despite this, he decided that he really had little time. He decided to call the detective. The detective told him that he had one very difficult task, this time 100,000 won. From time to time, the boy helped the detective. He gave him advice about people and asked him for advice. Detectives were always interested in the person in the video looks like the criminal, and the guy answered these questions, and every time after such cases, you bought him a good lunch. When they met again for lunch after the case was resolved, the detective said that he could eat as much as he wanted, and he could also give him money. After another case that the guy helped him solve, the detective gave him money. After all, for the guy it was easy money. Woojin said the detectives were good and asked him to tell her what was going on. Then the detective said that he was reading and they needed to talk in person, and asked when he finished his classes. The guy went into the freshman chat and saw that due to personal reasons of the professor, the lecture at 2 o'clock was canceled. Then Woojin told the detective that he was free at the moment and asked where he should go. The detective said that he would pick him up himself. A few minutes later, the guy left the dining room and headed to the very place where he was supposed to meet the detective. The detective stood waiting for him near the car, as they had agreed, because he needed help. When Woojin left the university, he saw the detective's car and approached him and asked how long he had been waiting for him. The detective looked at the guy and said that being a student suited him very well, because in fact he thought that studying at university was very difficult. The guy wanted to know what the matter was. The detective opened the car door and said that they needed to talk inside the car. When they sat down on the seat, the detective closed the car doors and began to tell. He first climbed into the back seat, saying that he needed to show the guy something. He was clearly stalling for time. Then Woojin asked him again what was the matter, and the detective replied that they could visit the crime scene instead of viewing the video or photo. The guy was a little tense because he had never been to a crime scene. He had always only looked at photographs, but he really wanted to. The detective looked at the guy to see if he really had come to visit the crime scene. The guy believed that people, no matter who they are, live based on their own experience. And therefore, the more experience he has, the better for a person, just as he gained experience today in the canteen. Every time he does something new, he gets a new experience, and it's only better for him. The guy said he wanted to experience for himself what could happen at a crime scene. The detective didn't think long. He thought if the guy really wanted it that way, then why not satisfy his curiosity? He started his car, shifted the clutch, and his car started moving. They drove off. A few minutes later, they were near the house where the crime was committed. The detective who drove up to the house told them that they needed to go up to the 3rd floor. The guy and the detective got out of the car, and then they went up to the 3rd floor where a policeman was standing guarding the crime scene. Yes, the detective approached the policeman and thanked him for his work. The policeman replied that it was not worth the thanks. The detective asked the guy again if he really needed to visit the real crime scene, to which the guy replied that yes, after which they went into the very apartment where the crime was committed. There was a large amount of blood on the floor, and it was visible how the corpse lying on the floor was outlined with chalk. All the walls in this apartment were also covered in blood. It was clear that it was a very bloody murder. The next moment, it was as if the guy had a picture of what happened in that apartment before his eyes. He understood that a man had come to the door of the apartment and rang the bell. He had a bag in his hands. The owner of the apartment calmly opened the door. No one suspected what he was talking about. It seemed he knew this person. As soon as this man entered the apartment, he immediately began to act from the very threshold and pulled out a huge knife from behind. Holding this huge knife in his hand, the criminal suddenly attacked the owner of the apartment. Since the owner of the apartment did not expect such actions, he did not even resist, and the criminal immediately struck him with the first blow. After the first blow, blood sprayed in all directions. It seemed like there was blood all around. It seemed like blood was everywhere. It splashed not only on, but also on the walls in the apartment's hallway. At this point, the apartment tried to move back to save his life by covering the wound, but the criminal did not fall away. After the first blow, the criminal struck the owner of the apartment again and beat him to the ground. The owner of the apartment was sitting on the floor. He could hardly move, and there was no way he could defend himself. After which, the owner of the apartment fell, attacked, and tried to crawl as far away from the criminal as possible. Well, the criminal caught up with him, grabbed him by the hair, and lifted his head up, and with his other hand he swung to cut his throat. The criminal covered his mouth with his hand to stop the owner of the apartment from screaming. He didn't let him breathe. The criminal waited until the owner of the apartment lost consciousness and was completely unable to resist or move. Everything happened exactly like that, and after a few minutes the guy was lying on the floor of the apartment in a pool of blood, as if he had seen all this from the outside. Woojin started talking about how the criminal actually aimed for the throat right away. And severe bleeding and a cheekbone wound on the right side of the neck, the criminal used a knife. The guy noticed that it was a kitchen knife and that it was not a crime in a fit of emotion. In fact, everything was planned, and the purpose of the crime was murder. The detective said what to expect from his boy. He can see crimes, look at the scene. The boy asked the detective something else found. The detective replied that there was nothing else and showed another video of the suspect who was seen on the cameras. Video surveillance was introduced. The guy wanted to ask if they found anything like a fingerprint or something else. The detective said no. The guy took the tablet from the detective and began to carefully review the material that he had on the video recording. It seemed that everything was exactly as he had seen. The man approached the door, pressed the doorbell, and stood in the hallway, waiting for the door to be opened for him. After which it was clear that the owner opened the doors. He was not surprised at all, which means the suspect was familiar with his victim. The man who came to the victim's house was about 180 centimeters tall. He was blonde, and he was holding a plastic bag with a bottle of soju in his hands. And the guy also said that the size of this man's shoes was somewhere around 270 mm. The detective said that all this is true, after which the guy asked the detective if they had caught the suspect who appeared on this film, and he also said that he doubted that this was the real criminal. The detective told him that they hadn't caught him and had arrested the guy, and he wanted Woojin to look at him. And most importantly, the detective did not understand why he thought that this was most likely not a real criminal. All the circumstantial evidence indicated that the detainee was a criminal. The guy looked at the detective and said if he was sure about this, then why did he contact him? Then the detective started saying that as always you can't fool him, but this guy who wasn't detained won't confess, and there's something else strange. This guy has a very vague alibi. This guy, when he was interrogated, said that he had an alibi and that he did not go home but spent the night in a hotel and paid in cash. At the very moment when he was at the hotel, the surveillance camera was broken and the owner of the hotel was drunk. And the hotel owner doesn't even remember which room the suspect was staying in at the time the hair was discovered. Another forensic scientist recorded everything that was at the crime scene. The guy said that they could not notice that the murder was committed with a long, sharp object similar to a knife. He asked them to listen to him, because if we assume that the criminal is skilled with a knife, it will be much easier. After all, in reality, the most common criminals use the tools they are accustomed to and do not choose those that they do not know how to use. After all, the criminal could have used a hammer, and he could also have tied up his victim with a bunch of tape so that she couldn't move and do anything. They do this because they think it will help and make them less nervous when executing their plan. If we assume that the worker's profession is closely related to water, then it becomes clear why there are no fingerprints. Even when pressing the door lock, the detective asked the guy again what it means it becomes clear, and he answered him yes, since close contact with water can cause eczema, which may prevent fingerprints from remaining. The guy also noticed that the hair that the criminal left at the crime scene could be animal hair, or for example, in the voice of a completely different person, or even a synthetic one. The detective did not understand what he meant. Then the guy said that he used a wig. The detective then asked the guy again if he really wanted to say that the criminal had disguised himself and committed the murder. The guy replied that that was exactly it. All this is necessary to create complications and to be more precise. To complicate the whole situation, he asked the detective to look. After all, if you look closely, you can see that the traces of the criminal were left with special emphasis on the heel, and the traces on the toes of the foot are too noticeable. Typically, when attacking, most of the force is applied to the toe or the front end of the foot. This can be seen in any martial arts where fighters show their skills. The detective didn't understand why the guy was talking about all this. Then Wu Jin told him that the criminal had deliberately put on shoes that were several sizes too big. And only in this case there is space left in the socks, and the trace remains weak. And I myself am interested and very curious that there is a print on the side of the shoe. The detective asked again. Maybe he stumbled during a fight. The guy thought that the victims were killed unexpectedly, but even if we assume that there was a fight, then with such a bend in his leg, he would definitely have stretched the ligaments. And then there is a high probability that he would have suffered a fracture. But none of this was visible when they were watching the man who was on the CCTV camera. The guy said that maybe he was wearing insoles, and he also told the detective to look at this. The criminal comes out without limping, even if in an excited state the adrenaline rises above the norm. This is impossible. He also wanted the detective to notice his hair after he came out. It looked a little different. After all, in reality, hair cannot grow so much and asymmetrically. In a matter of minutes, they were different in their structure and composition. These are the observations the guy made after he visited the crime scene and saw the CCTV footage. This means that it could be concluded that the criminal was deliberately wearing shoes that were a size too big. And also the most important thing is that he was wearing a wig, and this particular wig was slightly shifted and asymmetrical. The guy thought there must be some reason why the real criminal had to deal with the victim and the captured suspects. He believed that the real criminal had to interact with both of them at about the same time, and probably decided that the victim would be easy to kill. Due to his small build, the guy believed that there was currently a suspect of your height and larger build at the police station. Perhaps the real murderer decided that killing him would not be so easy. The detainee was 184 centimeters, shoe size 270 mm. At the time of his arrest, he had dark hair, as the length of his hair could have aroused a lot of suspicion among the police. Everything the guy said was true. The detective thought that was why he suspected. After all, when he caught the suspect, he immediately began asking why he dyed his hair and whether he was afraid that he would fall under suspicion. Unexpectedly for everyone, the guy said that the size of the real culprit and killer's foot is from 255 to 260 mm. The detective thought that he was wrong again. The guy also added that this person was most likely very close to the victim, and the suspected criminal needed to get rid of both of them. Now it was necessary to understand what was the reason why he killed the victim and framed another suspect caught by the police. And the most important thing was to understand what was the motive for the murder of one and the shifting of blame to another, even with disguise, most likely money. Well, it could also be revenge, because of which the criminal wanted to eliminate two people at once. Well, the girl who was not shared between them could also be the cause of this murder. What they ended up with was that the criminal had skillfully used a sword and his fingerprints had been erased due to eczema. The guy could also conclude that most likely this criminal graduated from college at the very least. He made such conclusions only because he believed that the lower the level of education, the more random the crimes. People who had no education killed their victims with objects that they came across. And the higher the level of education, the more likely it is that the crime will be systematic and planned. At that moment, the detective called his assistant. He wanted him to tell him what they hadn't figured out about the evidence. His assistant replied that they had indeed not done an analysis and that it looked like artificial hair and not human hair. The guy says that the victim lived in a studio room and the detained suspect spent the night in a shower hotel, which means that the living conditions for both were bad. The guy continued his analysis and said that the real size of the criminal's foot is 255 to 260 mm. Then, according to statistics, the approximate height would be 166 to 170 centimeters and age about 30 years. The detective suddenly remembered how he walked around and questioned everyone about this crime. As the criminal described, the guy matched one of the people. The detective called his assistant and said that the guy working at the sushi restaurant is definitely that bastard, and he needs to be arrested immediately. Wu Jin had everything he could tell that the crime was done, so he left the crime scene and headed back to the university. At that moment, a signal rang on his phone and he answered the call. Yes, the detective said that he really loves the guy because he helps him, but then he replied that he doesn't love him but thanks him for 100,001. The guy asked the detective what the motive was. The detective replied that the criminal borrowed money from those two, but they began to spread rumors that he was not paying back the debts, so he committed the murder. Now everything was clear. The detective thanked Woo Jin again and told him to listen carefully to the lecture. As the boy approached the university, one of the students greeted him from behind the next lecture. When the guy approached, he asked, "What is he, Woo Jin?" The guy looked and saw that this student has a short haircut, thick eyebrows, height 178, tan skin due to exposure to the sun, thin. It has a strong body build, gray hoodie. There was only one person in the correspondence who had no photos. He introduced himself as Khan. He was 20 years old. The guy looked at his face carefully and decided that judging by the help we had, and he was definitely around 20, and this guy said that his name was Khan, and they were the same age. Khan started talking about how Woo Jin had performed well at the previous lecture. He even thought that he had listened to a real lecture. And this guy also asked if they were also participating in the stock competition, and he heard that many from their department would be participating. Woo Jin thought if many people really participate, then he also needs to participate. Unless he participates, it will be strange. He had not yet decided what to do then. He was wondering what to tell Olya about silkworm larvae or ghost ants. He knew that even in the stock market, money was being sucked out by the ant people. And if most people are ordinary ants, then he will have to become an ant ghost of height skim money. He knew for sure that if the money ran out quickly, his mom, dad, and sister would be very upset. That's why he decided that this couldn't happen, and he would suck out all the money like liquid. Because he believed that it was perfectly normal to adapt to society. Kong asked Woo Jin when his classes start. The guy replied that at 10 o'clock. His new acquaintance suggested that in this case they go for a walk together. He clearly wanted to make friends with him. They went up to the auditorium where the next lecture was to take place. The students discussed their profits among themselves. Some said that his profits were already 3%, while another said that his shares had fallen by 7%. One of the students reassured another and said that there is a saying, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket." Woo Jin listened to all their conversations and understood that he also needed to start as soon as possible, because tomorrow after lunch there were classes, so he needed to start in the morning. At that moment, a teacher entered the classroom, stood in the center, and greeted the students. The professor said that this was their third lecture, and if everyone was ready, then he had no choice but to start. The guy sat by and listened to every word the teacher said. He didn't want to miss a single thought or a single term. In this lecture, he understood many new terms such as talent attraction, market share, and brand image. The professor continued to stand in the middle of the audience, telling new things, and the guy listened to him attentively. Woo Jin lowered his head down and said that he was not looking at the teacher at that moment. Then the teacher said that based on the result of this analysis, they can see the effect of market dominance. He looked at the guy. The teacher was very surprised because the student who showed himself very brightly in the previous lecture seemed not to be listening to him at all. After all, at the last lesson, when he asked if there were any questions, the guy raised his hand. His eyes were shining, and he asked questions. When the professor asked someone what they didn't understand, that student would also raise his hand and ask for it to be explained to him. The guy asked Nastya a lot of questions and asked so many times that the teacher couldn't understand why he was explaining this lecture instead of him. Woo Jin just fell asleep at some point, and the teacher thought that it was even better that he was sleeping because their conversations reminded him of a personal conversation and not a lecture. Woo Jin sat and thought that he couldn't fall asleep at all, which meant he needed to go to bed in the evening and get a good night's sleep. He believed that sleeping during classes was probably normal for many students. After all, when he watched the students from the side, he thought that he also wanted to sleep like ordinary people do. But it's not just being ordinary, it's complicated. At that moment, the boy heard that the lecture was over and the teacher was giving them homework. The guy's head rose up. It was as if he hadn't slept at all. He was concentrated. The next moment, the boy loudly shouted what task the professor would give him. And he also raised his hand up. He thought that finally at least some task, and he would definitely do it. The professor looked at the guy and did not understand when he woke up, but he began to say what the task was, which was to understand Adam Smith's theory of wealth. And we need to discuss the operation of the law of diminishing marginal utility in a perfectly competitive market and analyze ethical management in this process. The professor told them to split into groups of 4 and give him a list. Identify a leader. The guy raised his hand and asked, "Scientists explain the cost paradox by comparing diamonds to air." The professor replied that he thought that in the modern world, they could approach the law of diminishing marginal utility from a different point of view. The entire audience believed that, as always, the dispute between them Woojin said that we should allow him to explain using the example of mukbang and whether the law of diminishing marginal utility applies to those who eat a lot, because these people eat a lot but will get more pleasure from food. And even if we assume that they are forced to eat, they seem to get a different kind of pleasure. The professor answered the guy that this is most likely possible, but gambling and gambling addictions can be considered an exception to the rule. The guy replied that, however, he could not understand whether addiction could be considered an exception to the rule. All the other students had no idea what they were talking about or what words like leptin or hormone meant. It was very strange for everyone to hear that they felt full not because they ate a lot, but for other reasons. Some thought it was right to come here for a lecture. The guy sold it and said that if the level of leptin secreted is low, obesity may occur. He also said that in order to maintain the addiction, certain hormones strongly stimulate the brain nerves. Well, the professor thought, how could he possibly know about all this? When he looked at this guy, he understood that his Tone's eyes were full of curiosity and thirst, and he was really interested in all this. The guy continued to speak, but the professor interrupted him and said that time was up and the lecture was over. Assign them to teams and send him the lists. Also, the professor, when leaving, said that they would see each other at the next lesson. Everyone else sat and looked at the guy. Khan turned to him and said that if he wanted, he could go with him. Several other people wanted him to go with them. The professor was a little surprised to meet his new student and did not understand what could happen if he allowed him into the lab. He kept thinking about it, and the professor decided that no, this guy would rather give him a headache than help him in his investigation. The next morning, the guy woke up very early because he had important business. He sat down in his usual seat and decided that he really needed to buy some shares. He chose what he needed and made a purchase order. In a few seconds, the purchase order was completed. At that moment, he watched as the shares he bought began to rise sharply. The guy caught himself thinking that he should feel good, but he felt nothing at all, just like he thought it was hard to be an ordinary person. He continued to watch the chart, and the stock he bought began to fall sharply, but he still didn't feel anything. He looked at the arrow of the chart and saw that it was breaking through the very bottom of his shares that he bought, which sank down like rivers at their price. But again, he felt absolutely nothing. He thought that it was not entirely real, but it was just a project. He began to think that his feelings were sleeping somewhere deep in his subconscious, but he didn't know how to react. He began to remember what he had seen and heard recently, and all the emotions that he saw before his eyes. He understood that his second self knows everything that he subconsciously ignored in himself, and he thinks it would be nice for him to look around after a long time. The guy closed his eyes and told his other self to come out. After all, it was a completely different person, and he had complete control over his entire body. He walked, moved, blanketed everything completely differently, and he specifically chose this particular body. The guy went to the mirror and turned to himself. He looked, and he really liked this reflection. He looked and thought that they had not seen each other for a long time, but he was still as handsome as before, and he could become a celebrity for entertainment at any moment. At that moment, the guy deliberately took off his t-shirt. His case was completely covered in scars. He did it specifically to stop the second self because it was already too much. He sat down on a chair and looked at what was happening on the stock market. He didn't care at all. Well, he was interested in quite a lot of questions, and he typed them in order to get answers. He needed some time to ask a question and then get an answer to the question he asked. He clicked the mouse incessantly, asking one question, turning the pages, reading and asking the next question. His inner second self was telling him that he had to do it and as soon as possible. Because when he was locked up, he had a lot of control over that body, and he could do whatever he wanted with it. But now Woojin is gradually taking control of his subconscious, and he didn't really like it. And if everything continues like this, then he may disappear completely, and there will be no second me. So he decided that he had to show this Woojin what he was worth and take control of this body again. The second thing I did when I saw what was happening on the stock exchange was that it seemed like she had a lot of power in her hands. His inner self, observing everything that was happening, saw that the guy was buying something. But she also wanted to know from Woojin what kind of model this was, because he was no longer a child but quite an adult. And in this case, there was no practice. Everything was for real. He clicked the mouse, and a message appeared that the purchase order had been completed. Then he started clicking the mouse over and over again. The purchase order was completed several times. He sat and continued with this mouse still buying on the stock exchange. His purchase order was executed. And oddly enough, they all rose up, which means in this case he made money. He sat and watched everything that was happening, turning to that very Woojin so that he could hear him. After all, money is something that others should earn for him. He was completely sure of it. In fact, this meant that a person does not print money personally, but provides someone with a certain service and receives money for it. And this could only happen if Shin Woo-jin became the CEO. After all, a company's CEO is needed to make money and pay employees' salaries. And he also has to relax and play golf with the chairman, so he has to be constantly engaged in business. In that case, he should thank the chairman for entrusting him with such a position as CEO and should be constantly careful, because he may not have enough strength to constantly think about business and the money he needs to earn. But there is also a CEO who makes money and hires other workers. In this case, everything is completely wrong. He can stand and watch others work from the outside and decide who did a good job. In this case, the chairman will also consider him his employee and let him earn money. In fact, money comes and goes, but everything that happens to him is just great. His employees will celebrate this in a completely different way at the table, thinking that they have worked well again and need a drink. If he doesn't want to take big risks, then he can choose an ordinary life. He will constantly climb up the ropes. Well, if he wants wealth, he will have to take risks and losses. Even if he does not run a business, he will have employees who are able to earn him money. In fact, this is a theory, and there is money because money is workers and workers must work to earn him money. And money allows him to do his favorite things, such as going to the movies and having fun. And money also brings feelings of happiness with the help of endorphin and serotonin. And most importantly, money reduces the level of stress that a person receives throughout the day every day. And money also regulates the movement of reward excitation and the like. Oddly enough, money makes people stronger, changes their bodies for the better, and makes them more beautiful. And in this sense, money is just like a personal massage therapist taking care of a person's condition. Well, despite all this, we cannot realize and admit that money is the most important thing in a person's life. And also the money that remains after doing your favorite things and after taking care of yourself can be your personal employees. If at some point a person finds a gold mine, he has no choice but to go and dig for gold. For this, he sends his employees. Now we need to determine which business trips to send the money to find a gold mine. And despite the fact that everyone is looking for where to mine gold, the main money will come from selling pickaxes right at the entrance to the gold mines. A lot of people go and start looking for their gold, and they make blow after blow, and they think that there is definitely gold there. And they swing so hard that the pickaxe can't take it and breaks right in their hands. What do they need to do? Go and buy a new one because they're sold at the entrance? So the workers go up and buy another pickaxe which costs 10,000 won. And after some time, the person who sells picks sees that there is a queue for him, and he successfully makes money. Each of those who came to him and bought a pickaxe from him say thank you to him without even realizing that in this way, they are enriching him. Selling an ordinary pickaxe near a mine is much more profitable than mining gold. And after a while, the person who sold the pickaxes thinks that maybe he should expand his sales. At the moment, he was standing at a crossroads and thought that ultimately he needed to decide because it was important where he would send his workers. After all, at the moment, he sent his money to the joint stock company Trentuli, a company that in the past was engaged in independent development of cosmetics. On the market, the price of this company's shares was stable until 2 years ago when the CEO changed, after which the price of the shares fell sharply and became unstable. It was clear that volume manipulation techniques were used. Market capitulation was 80 billion. Such a strategy could work if the owner had a lot of money. Now, all that was left was to let it all explode. After some time, all TV channels were talking about the hair loss medicine that this company had created. The stocks went up sharply, they grew, and patriotism was on the rise. Everything went as it should have. But in fact, it was impossible to miss this. First the shares rose sharply, then fell a little, fell. All people on earth are not rational at all, they just act like others. They feel the atmosphere and views from the outside. If one says that it is very beautiful and needs to be visited, the other replies that he will go and do it right now. If one says that it is very fashionable, then another says that he wants to try it, and if everyone has already been there, then he needs to go there too. When stocks go down sharply, you need to be calm. This is definitely the path you need to choose, and you can't jump off with everyone else, even if you think you could die at that moment. Even in such a situation, he believed that he should not sell because no one should consider him some kind of ant. Even though everyone else has already drowned in the ocean and asked for help, you need to sit and wait for your moment. And also, under no circumstances should you extend your hand to anyone. The only thing you can do is to further sink everyone else, step on their hand. In order to survive in such a situation, you need to walk not only on the heads but also on the hands of those people who are drowning. This is the only way to survive. And this is the only way to pave the way for yourself to attract money and become rich. He sat and looked at the monitor screen, watching how the graphs changed, sometimes falling, sometimes rising up. He was even a little bored. But after a while, the arrow went up sharply and he realized that he had done it. He did absolutely everything right, and now he was a fully provided for person having made the right choice. She didn't just rise up, she flew up into the sky. It seemed like that couldn't happen. So he decided to end it there. After he finished his studies, he left the house and told his family that he would be back soon. His mother came out to see him off and asked why he didn't stay for lunch because he would leave hungry. The guy said that everything was fine. The guy was in a hurry because he wanted to get to university as quickly as possible. When I entered the auditorium, I heard someone saying that he couldn't withdraw now and it was better not to take it on at all. Another said that he was able to earn 19%. He considered himself very lucky. Others wanted him to teach them too. This guy was telling everyone else that they should do what he was telling them to do, and others were asking him. He was looking at the volume of transactions and whether he had really bought and immediately sold shares. This guy was talking about not looking at the indicators. Everything becomes much easier if you can observe and analyze. Woo Jin gathered a group around him. He said that he would do everything and share with them. They did not doubt him. A few other guys wanted Woo Jin to be in their group because they thought he was doing really well. The guy who was doing the stocks stood up and told his friends that he was coming now. I'm closer to Woo Jin. He said that his stocks are doing very well. Everyone else was surprised what he was talking about. Khan turned around and looked at him and said, if he was talking about the stock competition, then he is not involved in it. He is not that smart. The girl turned her head and said that she doesn't do that either. And then she added that she doesn't know how to work with stocks properly. This guy was very surprised. He looked at her and said that she just needed to get started and that they didn't understand what the problem was. Woo Jin looked at him and thought about his words. First, he decided to analyze it. He didn't need much time to do this. He just needed to see his face and how he behaved. His classmate kept asking him because he was supposedly involved in stocks. The guy looked and saw that his classmate had crescent-shaped eyes when smiling, and asymmetrical corners of the mouth, motionless clavicular muscles. It was a fake smile. A little earlier, Chong Hun, that was the name of this guy, felt something like fear because he was getting close to Lee Mina. All this was an unconscious reaction, and it was similar to when you meet people who are much stronger than you and you don't know what to expect from them. In this case, the person either simply turns away and pretends that he does not know these people or even switches to the other side. Besides, men, unlike women, are more observant and can look at an attractive girl. But when they meet her gaze, they quickly look away. Make eye contact with a member of the opposite sex that you find attractive. Men feel not tension but fear. And in fact, all these feelings are part of evolution, and it shows that fear of the leader of the group is still firmly rooted in human DNA. The most interesting thing is that most attractive women have always been close to leaders. Because the rest of the men have fear DNA and are afraid of being killed or banished. And most importantly, they are afraid to touch this woman, they retreat, say sorry, and all this unconsciously influenced Chong Hun. When Chong Hun came up to him, he asked if he had any losses, but he asked with a fake smile on his face. After all, he showed off his new watch to everyone, as well as the expensive shoes and trousers he had. He said that he was able to earn 19%. Everyone thought it was so cool and asked him to teach them too. Now it was necessary to understand the reason why the god of which Chong Hun lived to show off approached him and started this conversation. After all, in reality, there was nothing in common between them, and he was ready at any moment to strike with the knife that was in his hand. Most likely, he did all this just to use the opportunity and attract Li Ming's attention. That's why he decided that he should choose a target like Woo Jin, who would be very easy for him to deal with. Woo Jin responded to the guy that he screwed up. Everyone looked at him, not understanding what he meant. Chong Hun asked why and asked if his profit was not what he expected. The guy told him that he should have used an imitation, but he accidentally bought the real thing. Chong Hun heard about this and was very surprised. Then he laughed and asked again if he really bought the real thing. The guy started laughing and saying that this couldn't be, and how could he be so wrong? He wanted to know how much he had lost. Woo Jin told him that lying is not normal, so he told the truth and said that he received 30% of the profit. When Chong Hun heard about this, his face changed and he asked again if it really was 30%. Woo Jin didn't lie to him. He took out his phone and showed the chart, and everyone really saw that he received 30% profit. Everyone immediately started discussing this topic. Did he make money by mistake? And is he also good at stocks? Jung Hoon stood there for a while and looked at Woo Jin and didn't understand how he was able to do that. After all, it was completely unusual for a guy like him, It seemed like he was an ordinary gray mouse. He lived in the lowest neighborhood, but he actually had big eyes. This guy had the oldest mobile phone, and he didn't even have a watch, but he had long fingers. On his feet were the most popular model of shoes that cost at least 50,000 won, and his legs were too long. The maximum daily limit of transactions showed 30%. It is unclear how he got such a profit. Woojin looked at his classmate and understood that he was not being judged by his knowledge at all. He wanted to know what he was looking for in him. Most likely, Chonghun came to find something in which he would be worse than him. Chonghun ran up to him and asked him what kind of deals they were and if he would let him see them. At that moment, Chonghun knocked the phone out of his hands. He wanted to see what kind of deals these were. But the phone jumped out of his hands and flew upwards. It could fall at any moment. The guy calculated the height, weight of the phone, the speed of the fall, the angle at which it would fall, and the material of the stairs. It was unclear whether he should catch it considering all this, and he would most likely crash. At the last moment, he decided that he needed to catch it. And he suddenly extended his hand, after which he caught his phone. All this was unexpected for everyone else. No one around could see such a reaction. They stood there thinking that it all looked cool and great that he caught it. Chonghun asked him for forgiveness, to which the guy replied that he should be more careful and that everything was fine. At that moment, his hoodie rose up. Chonghun was very surprised because he saw a large number of scars on the guy's body. Chonghun couldn't help but ask what kind of wounds he had on his lower back, because he had never seen so many scars in his life. All the other students, when they saw these scars, were also very surprised. They wanted to know the answer. Without waiting for an answer, Chonghun said that he was most likely some kind of hooligan, which is why he has so many scars. He continued to say that probably all the gangsters avoid him in the bands, and if there is a fight, then everyone will immediately run away. He turned around and looked at the girls from behind and told them to be more polite with him. They were worried that it would most likely be very painful. Chonghun continued to talk about how the same thing would happen to everyone who didn't do their homework on the project, and then the guy laughed loudly, thinking that he had finally gotten through to him. People get very upset and even start crying when other people criticize or gossip about them, especially when girls start telling their friends about a guy and discussing how he walks like that. They unconsciously feel superiority. At this very time, the reward system is activated, dopamine is released, and these people begin to laugh and mock their victim. Hatred, anger, envy, or jealousy focus human time energy. By influencing the secretion of cortisol, hatred and cursing of others are not just emotions. They are about getting satisfaction. This behavior is biologically linked to pleasure. At first, he and his classmate Chonghun bragged without hesitation, and he was good at it. He bragged not only about the things he wore, but also about the actions he performed. He started talking about the guy, saying that he probably got hurt when he was fighting alone against 17 people. He was kind of making fun of him. And judging by how boldly he bullies and judges his opponent, he was directly dependent on self-expression. If Chonghun can overcome his addiction in the future, he will often behave exactly like this, inflicting not only moral, but also physical destruction on his opponents by beating him. In fact, most people are willing to harm other people by hitting and causing pain, but the victims will always be the people who are in the minority. That's why being a victim is a very unusual thing. Woojin thought that at this very moment, he should take the side of the majority and be the most ordinary one, just like everyone else. The guy needed to get out of this situation, and he actually stood up to offer them. He said, "How about we have a drink and chat before they start their mission," since he had earned some money and could pay. Having said this, he immediately realized that he had released a bait named Li Mina into his territory, who was ready to follow him. Woojin turned around at that moment and asked his opponent if he wanted to go with them, since he had earned it by pure chance. Then the guy added that he would also like to learn how to work with stocks, and he is actually good at it if he exalts his opponent like that. His opponent was delighted and said that it was not difficult at all, and he was ready to go with him. Then he too would enter the zone he had created. And then it will be much easier to communicate with him not only on a topic that interests him, but he will be able to find out everything and what he needs. His opponent will be like on the operating table, and he will be able to extract from him what he needs. After all, it is much easier to act on his own territory. He can even use anesthesia and find out everything that is internal. He will only have to wait, like in a laboratory, until the patient falls asleep and is no longer conscious. Then he will sort it out as if in a laboratory, and people will know the truth, and it doesn't matter what kind of truth it is. The students did not wait long. They went to one of the busiest streets where there were a large number of cafes and restaurants. The administrator suggested that they go into one of the establishments and sit down in it. At that moment, Woojin called on the phone and asked his friend. He was far away. He replied that he would come to them a little later. On the phone, I heard that he would like to see his new friends. The guy replied that he would ask the guys. After he talked on the phone, he decided that he should join everyone else who was already waiting for him. This cafe had a pretty good atmosphere and was very cozy. Chong-hun said that recently he often goes to court. Woo-jin approached his new friends and asked if they had already ordered. The girl reported that they said that everyone would get an appetizer. Chong-hun asked the guy, since recently he often sleeps during classes, is it really because of the promotion that he has a problem with sleep? At that moment, the waiter brought the order. It was quite a lot of food. Chong-hun continued to wonder if he really didn't sleep at night, reading articles about promotions. Woo-jin took a bite of one of the snacks and said it was very tasty. His interlocutor asked if he was even listening to him. Woo-jin replied that yes, of course he was listening. But he already said that he bought these shares by mistake. Chong-hun told him if he really does it, he should sell them as soon as possible. It's not worth the risk. After all, this was not the kind of situation in which a newbie on the stock market like him could make money, which Woo-jin replied that he looked at 19 indices, checked the exchange rate by country and found this company. Chong-hun, when he said all this, was even more surprised. Did he really do everything he said? He didn't even understand what he was looking at when choosing. The girl supported him and said that despite the fact that it was a mistake, he still received 30% of the profit because it was really cool. Woo-jin looked at his opponent and saw his expression. It was proof that he was angry and anyone could see it. His opponent couldn't resist taking one bottle for himself first. After which he said even if it happened by mistake, it's great, and offered everyone a drink. Then he looked at Woo-jin and asked if he would also drink, to which the guy replied thank you. And his opponent put his hands on Natalia to make himself look bigger. All this resembled the movement of a cobra that inflates its body, which visually increases the physique and gives a defensive pose. The girl interrupted him and said that it definitely seemed even cooler that he did it by mistake, but his opponent did not agree with her and was going to defend himself. Jung-hoon unknowingly showed incredible defensive behavior, but he is an aggressive person prone to showing off. He held the bottle in his left hand, but he wasn't really lefty, and he would most likely show himself very soon. After which Chong-hun said, if he makes a mistake like that a couple more times, he can buy himself a watch, and showed his Namika on the watch. He naturally attracted attention to himself. In this way, he demonstrated his importance, after which he raised his glass and invited everyone to drink together, saying that the first glass should be taken in one go. At that moment, Woo-jin thought that he could finally have a drink too, because he wanted to try it so much. Woo-jin, along with the rest of the students, drank the first glass in one gulp, after which he felt how everything in his head began to change, and he could no longer be so concentrated. At some point, he even liked the taste, and he thought that this time it would be even sweeter for him to drink. He remembered that they say that with age, the taste of alcohol gets better. He wondered if he was still a big kid, and that was bad. Suddenly, the phone rang. The guy looked and saw that his girlfriend was calling him. So he told his friends that his friend was nearby and she wanted to come in for a while and asked everyone for permission. He did it purely formally, because he knew perfectly well that even if they were against it, he would still bring her to this place. The guy took his phone, answered her call, and said that she could come. Woo-jin understood perfectly well that she wanted to look at his new friends and most likely at his girlfriends. This was typical only for girls. Woo-jin and his group had been sitting in this cafe for quite a long time and were not planning to leave yet. They talked about many things, even very funny ones, and therefore laughed loudly. Suddenly the door of the cafe opened. The bell rang. Everyone turned to see the new visitor. Together with everyone else, Woo-jin turned around and he understood that this was most likely his girlfriend. When she went inside, she was in a rather aggressive mood. She asked him if he really liked such places. He suggested that she go inside. The girl came closer and introduced herself as a friend of Woo-jin's, saying that her name was Lee Hyerim. Everyone sitting at that table greeted her, and each one began to say their name in turn. They considered her very beautiful. When the girl came closer to the table and decided to sit next to Woo-jin, she asked him if he really liked wine. The guy replied that his friend recommended this place. Chong-hun was the last to greet her, introduced himself. He thought she was really cool, and asked if she was by any chance Woo-jin's girlfriend. The girl turned her head and looked at the guy who was talking to her with an appraising glance. At first, she noticed the expensive jacket and the fact that he was dressed very well. Then she lowered her eyes and saw that he had a watch on his hand, which meant he earned well. The girl lowered her eyes and answered him that no, she was just a friend. But she categorically did not like those who try to present themselves as something they are not. So she raised her hand and adjusted her hair. At that moment, Chung-hun saw that she had a much more expensive watch on her hand. So he felt a little uneasy and he hid his hand and no longer showed the watch that was on his hand. After all, the price range of the watches that Harim wears was beyond the means of the average person. Chokun, slightly drunk, loosened his tongue and began to say whether they really were friends. He thought that they looked very good together, so he wanted to hurt the pride of both the girl and the guy. Wu Jin answered him that there really was nothing like that between them, and they had been just friends for some time. After which Chong Hun got up from his seat, went to his table neighbor and said that he heard that he had good body proportions since swimming was his hobby. The guy was a little shy and asked how he knew what he heard, that he just thought so. Wu Jin then asked him if it must be quite nice to snorkel, to which his new friend replied that it was. Chung Hun got a little angry and started joking that it was time for swimming lessons and what you need to pay attention to when snorkeling. Wu Jin turned to the girl sitting next to him and asked her what her hobby was. She replied that in general she didn't have any in particular, she liked watching movies. The fate of the question was that it was necessary to obtain information. She said that she loves crime thrillers, so as soon as she has the opportunity, she will definitely watch it. But if you change the form of this question a little, the other person can feel significant joy. While everyone was happily showing off their conversation, Chung Hoon drank a few more glasses. That is why no one asked him any questions. He found himself in isolation. Well, as a person accustomed to demonstrative behavior, he soon showed himself and his symptoms of addiction. Eager to have fun again, so a minute later he asked his neighbor what shares he had bought. The guy sitting next to him scratched the back of his head, looked up and remembered the name of these shares. Chong Hun got mad at him. How can he not know the names of the stocks he doesn't trade? This will be his minus. Vivan believed that when a man starts something, he should focus on it, otherwise, he will only make a profit like Wu Jin by mistake. Wu Jin answered him, or maybe it's the other way around. He will get profit if he doesn't concentrate and makes a mistake. He thought that something could happen someday. In fact, the emotions of impulse are with small print, and the brainstem survival instinct works relatively stronger. In other words, logical thinking weakened and emotions' instinctive behavior intensified. Each person expresses emotions in their own way. Chong Hun turned his head and saw that his neighbor had a bracelet on his hand. He asked what it was and heard the answer that it was Hakuna Matata, and they say that it brings good luck to its owner. In fact, alcohol makes a person strange, but only removes the mask and reveals the true essence of a person. Wu Jin told his classmate that he needs to put in the effort and why he's hoping for the luck of some dubious bracelet. Chung Hoon believed that luck wouldn't come to him just because he wore some bracelet, and in general he believed that luck was bullshit. Most likely this person often thought about it, and they say that such people get pleasure from bitching over others, thereby setting the tone in the team. However, this person cannot appreciate the whole picture, and oddly enough, Lee Hiram is part of this picture. The girl raised her head and asked what she was wondering what he meant by chasing luck. She raised her hand and showed everyone her manicure and said he sees it because her nails were the color of balsam. She said that if you paint your nails this color, your first love will come true, so she painted them. Is she really an idiot in his opinion? Lee Hiram, who always thought that the whole world revolved around her, spoke about such things. That is why she never thought about the feelings and opinions of other people. The girl turned to Chokhun. She was also curious to ask him a question about fake watches, clothes, and shoes that he wears. Did he really believe that these things helped him strengthen his empty pride? The guy thought that now it was Chung Hun's turn to get angry to defend herself in front of everyone. Everything was going according to plan as planned. Chung Hun was an ordinary puppet in his hands, and as soon as he pulled his strings, everything went according to plan.